The rain came down hard that October night in Millhaven, Oregon. Not the soft gray mist that most people in the Pacific Northwest learn to ignore. Not the kind of rain you pull a hood up against and keep walking through. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of rain that fell with intention, that hit the tin roofs and the cracked sidewalks like it had a message to deliver and no patience for anyone who wasn't listening. It came down in sheets off the mountain ridge line to the east, rolling through the gap in the hills that the old-timers called the Notch, and it swept across Millhaven the way it always did in October, like it was reminding the town of something the town already knew and kept forgetting. Evie Harlow stood in the hallway of the house on Delwood Street with her back pressed flat against the wall and her worn canvas backpack at her feet. She was 17 years old, 5'5", 122 pounds, though she hadn't weighed herself in months because the bathroom scale in that house belonged to Marcus, and everything in that house belonged to Marcus. And she had learned a long time ago not to use the things that belonged to Marcus if she could help it. Her hair was dark and pulled back tight. Her eyes were the color of the river in November, a deep, still gray that people sometimes found unsettling when they looked at her too long, because those eyes had a way of seeing more than they let on. She was wearing her gray hoodie over a faded blue shirt, and her jeans had a small tear at the left knee from a fence she'd climbed 6 months ago to cut across the Weller property on her way home from the diner. And her shoes were the same canvas sneakers she'd worn since the previous spring, because she hadn't had the money for new ones and hadn't asked. She had not asked for a lot of things in this house. Marcus Vane stood between her and the front door. He was 49 years old, tall, a pressed collared shirt, even at this hour, even on a Wednesday night, even in the middle of the kind of confrontation that other men might have conducted in an undershirt and pajama bottoms. Marcus Vane did not do anything carelessly. That was the thing about him that Evie had understood almost from the day her mother had brought him home 3 years after her father died. 2 years after the grief had softened Cora Harlow into someone who needed steadiness more than she needed happiness. Marcus provided steadiness. Marcus provided the mortgage payment and the electricity bill and the insurance and the new water heater and the dinners out on Friday nights. Marcus provided everything that looked from the outside like a family being held together. His eyes were the color of cold coffee left out too long. They were patient eyes. That was the worst thing about them. "Don't make me say it twice, Evelyn," he said. She didn't answer. Her mother, Cora, stood at the kitchen sink 15 feet away with her back to both of them. The faucet was running. The dishes were not moving. Her hands rested on the edge of the counter the way hands rest when a person is using an object to keep themselves upright against something heavier than gravity. She had not turned around since Marcus had said what he said. She had not made a sound. Evie looked at the back of her mother's shoulders. She looked at the slight rise and fall of them. She looked at the way they were drawn up just slightly, the way a person's shoulders draw up when they are bracing against a cold wind or a loud noise or a thing they knew was coming and could not stop. She had seen those shoulders in that position before. She had seen them on the morning the state troopers came to the door 8 years ago. Two men with their hats in their hands and their faces arranged into the particular expression that men arrange their faces into when they have come to tell a woman that the person she loved most is gone. Cora's shoulders had done the same thing then. They had drawn up and held, and her knees had not buckled, and she had not fallen. And Evie had been 9 years old and had stood in the hallway in her pajamas, watching her mother receive the worst news of her life, like a woman who had been waiting for it. She had not understood that then. She was starting to understand it now. Marcus glanced at his watch with the measured, impersonal gesture of a man checking an appointment he already knew he was going to keep. 5 minutes, he said. Then I'm calling the sheriff and reporting a runaway. The word landed in the hallway air between them. Runaway. She wasn't running. She had never been running. You could not run from something that was actively pushing you. You could only go in the direction you were being pushed and try to decide somewhere along the way whether that direction was going to be the end of you or the beginning of something else. Evie bent down and picked up her backpack. It wasn't heavy. It held 3 shirts, one of them the gray thermal she wore under everything in winter, a hoodie that was already on her back, one pair of jeans rolled tight to save space. a toothbrush, a travel-sized tube of toothpaste that was almost finished. The cell phone she had bought herself with money from the diner 2 summers ago, currently sitting at 14% battery. A paperback book, the spine broken from being read too many times, the title worn off the cover from too many jacket pockets and too many backpacks and too many years. And the photograph. She never went anywhere without the photograph. It was folded twice and tucked inside the back cover of the paperback. It was 8 years old. In it, her father was kneeling beside a workbench in the driveway of the old house on Carmichael Street, the one before this one, the one with the good light in the kitchen and the apple tree in the backyard that nobody had planted on purpose. His hand was on her shoulder. His eyes were squinting against the afternoon sun. She was 9 years old in that picture, wearing a denim jacket 2 full sizes too big because it had been his first, and the sleeves hung past her wrists, and she had refused to take it off for 3 weeks running. They were both smiling. The particular kind of smiling that happens when nobody told you to smile for the camera. The kind that just happened because the world was good and the afternoon was warm and you were standing next to the person you loved most, and there was nowhere else either of you needed to be. The world had not been good since. She slung the backpack over one shoulder and walked to the door. Marcus stepped aside. He did it with a small, deliberate motion, the motion of a man who has already won and considers theatrics beneath him. He even reached past her and opened the front door. Not roughly, not with anger. He opened it the way you open a door for a guest who has overstayed their welcome at a dinner party. Politely, irrevocably. "You'll thank me one day," he said. Evie stepped past him onto the porch. She did not say anything. She did not look at him. She looked back once through the open doorway at the kitchen at her mother's back, at those drawn-up shoulders still hovering above the running water in the motionless dishes. Mom. The word came out quieter than she intended. It was the last word she had left, and she knew it, and she spent it anyway because some things you spend even when you know you can't afford them. Cora Harlow's shoulders rose once. One small involuntary movement. The kind a person's shoulders make when they have heard something they cannot pretend not to have heard. They rose and they held for half a second, and then they fell again. The water kept running. The door closed behind Evie with a soft final click. Not slammed, not thrown, closed. The sound of a man who had won something and saw no reason to be angry about it now that it was over. She stood on the porch for 3 seconds, long enough to feel the temperature drop as the warmth of the house left her. Long enough to feel the first heavy drops of rain hit the canvas of her backpack and the cotton of her hoodie and find the back of her neck. Long enough to understand that the place she had just left was not going to be there when she turned back around. Then she walked. She did not look back. She had a feeling about looking back. She had the very specific feeling that if she turned her head and looked at that house one more time, something would give way inside her, that she would not be able to put back together quickly enough to do what she needed to do next. And what she needed to do next was walk. So she kept her eyes forward and she walked. Delwood Street ran south. South ran toward the railroad tracks, and the railroad tracks ran toward the old industrial corridor on the edge of town where the lumber mills had gone quiet a decade ago. The buildings were still there, most of them. The big corrugated metal processing plants with their rust-streaked walls and their loading docks and their chain-link perimeters with the padlocked gates nobody had unlocked in years. Millhaven had been built around those mills. For 60 years, they had been the reason the town existed, the reason the diner on Main Street stayed open, and the hardware store stayed stocked, and the high school had enough kids in it to field a football team. When the first one closed, people said it was temporary. When the second one closed, people said it was cyclical. When the last one shut down and the corporate offices in Portland stopped returning calls, people stopped saying things about it out loud and started just living with the shape of what was left. Evie had grown up in that shape. She had grown up in a town that had learned to be smaller than it used to be, in a house that had learned to be quieter than it used to be, with a mother who had learned to need less than she used to need. She had grown up knowing the way children know things, without being told that the world she lived in was a diminished version of some earlier world that had been better, and that the distance between those two worlds had something to do with the morning the state troopers came, and something to do with the man in the pressed shirt who had stepped into the gap her father left, and something to do with herself, though she had never been able to say precisely what. The street lights on the south end of Delwood were old and yellow, and not all of them were working. Some flickered. Some had given up entirely and left long stretches of black wet pavement between one circle of sickly light and the next. She passed a dog that barked at her once from behind a chain-link fence and then went back to sleep. She passed a man getting into a pickup truck who looked at her for a long second with the expression of a man who has noticed something that concerns him and decided it is not his concern. She passed a house where the television was on behind closed curtains, the blue light pulsing through the gap, the way television light always pulses rhythmically, indifferently, a heartbeat that doesn't know you're watching it. Her hoodie soaked through inside of 4 minutes. The rain was serious rain. It had been building all day, moving down from the mountains in the kind of slow-rolling weather system that the people on the local radio station described with barely contained excitement, and that everyone else in Millhaven just called October. Her jeans went heavy with water from the knees down. Her shoes started making that sucking sound, that particular squelching rhythm that wet sneakers make on wet pavement, keeping time with her walking in a way that was almost musical if you were in the mood for that kind of music, which she was not. Her hair plastered itself to the sides of her face. She didn't cry. She had wanted to cry for approximately 2 years. She had wanted to cry at various specific moments during those 2 years with a specificity and an urgency that had surprised her. She had wanted to cry the first time Marcus had sat in her father's chair at the kitchen table and reached across for the salt without asking. She had wanted to cry the morning she found that her father's workbench in the garage had been cleared out and replaced with a set of metal storage shelves from the hardware store. She had wanted to cry on her 16th birthday when Cora had made the particular kind of birthday cake that her father used to make, got the recipe slightly wrong, and hadn't noticed. But somewhere in those 2 years, the part of her that cried had gone quiet, in the way that things go quiet when they have been told often enough that they are not welcome. And now walking south in the rain at 11:30 on a Wednesday night with everything she owned on her back and $9 in her pocket, the part of her that cried would not come back regardless of how urgently she needed it. Her father's voice came back instead. He used to talk to her on rainy nights. Not nights like this one, but close enough. When she was small and the thunder scared her, he would come and sit at the foot of her bed and talk in the low, even voice. He had the voice that had no urgency in it, the voice that seemed to exist at a frequency below panic. He would tell her things, small things usually, things he had learned or noticed or thought about that he wanted to share with someone. And she was always the person he wanted to share things with. He used to tell her that the worst things in life were not the storms. The worst things in life, he said, were the days that felt fine on the outside and were rotting on the inside. You can survive a storm, Evie. A storm makes noise. A storm shows you what it is. It's the quiet kitchens you have to watch for. It's the running faucets and the turnbacks and the doors closed softly that you have to watch for. Because those are the things that get inside you without your permission. And by the time you feel them, they've already been there for years. She had not understood that at 7. She understood it completely at 17. Fletcher Harlow had been 38 years old when he died. A mechanic, the obituary in the Millhaven Courier had said, beloved husband and father, survived by his wife Cora and his daughter Evelyn. He had loved fishing and woodworking and the Oregon State Beavers football team, and he had died in a single-vehicle accident on the bend near the Pine River Junction on Route 12 on a foggy February morning in 2018, when his pickup truck had gone through a section of damaged guardrail and down the embankment and burned. The state troopers had come to the door at 6 in the morning. They had their hats in their hands. Cora had stood in the doorway in her robe and had not fallen to the floor the way people fall in movies, and 9-year-old Evie had stood in the hallway behind her mother, watching and not understanding. She had understood almost nothing about that morning for 8 years. And now she was walking south in the rain with the slow, creeping certainty that she had been right not to understand it, that there was something underneath that morning that she had never been given the tools to reach. that the mechanic in the obituary and the man in the photograph were not entirely the same person, and that the distance between those two versions of her father was a distance she was only now at 17 beginning to be equipped to cross. She walked for 40 minutes. Her phone died somewhere around the 25-minute mark. The battery percentage had been dropping faster than usual, which meant the cold was getting into the lithium cells, which was a thing her father had once explained to her when she was 8, and she had retained for reasons she hadn't understood at the time and understood perfectly now. She stopped trying to check it. It was a dead rectangle in her front pocket. It had served its purpose, which was to get her through the day, and now the day was over and she would deal with the next one without it. The town thinned around her. The houses got farther apart. The trees got taller and darker, pressing in on both sides of the road from the second-growth forest that had come back after the old-growth logging ended, filling in the spaces between the town and the mountains, with a wall of Douglas fir and hemlock that was already 60 feet tall in places and getting taller every year. She could hear the river somewhere to the west, the North Fork running high with the October rain. That constant low conversation the river had with its banks, one of the sounds she associated most closely with being in Mill Haven, the sound that you stopped hearing after a while if you lived there long enough, and then heard again with sudden clarity when you had been somewhere else and came back. She was not coming back tonight. She did not know where she was going. She had $9 in her pocket, and a backpack that was almost entirely soaked through, and a phone that was dead, and a photograph that was getting damp at the edges, and a paperback book she had read so many times she could recite passages from it in her sleep. She had the name of her father's company written in small, precise letters at the top of a personnel form she had not yet opened, but had seen through the edge of a folder she'd found in the cabinet under the bathroom sink 3 weeks ago, and had not told anyone about because she had learned very early in her life in Marcus Vane's house that the information you found unexpectedly was worth more when you kept it to yourself until you knew what to do with it. She saw the lights ahead through the rain, blurred and yellow, smeared like paint on wet glass. The gas station was called Callaway's. The sign was hand-painted, the letters large and slightly uneven, faded to a pale approximation of the green it had probably been when it was new. It was propped against the front wall of a low cinder block building, the color of old concrete, 2 pumps under a metal overhang, a service bay on the south side, with a roll-up door that was 2/3 closed against the rain. Most of the bulbs in the overhang were dead. One remaining fluorescent tube threw thin, unreliable light across the pumps and the wet asphalt. It flickered with the particular nervous energy of a light that has been told it can stop working whenever it's ready and has been choosing not to for years out of sheer stubbornness. There were no cars at the pumps. The office window glowed yellow and dim, and through the glass, Evie could make out the slow movement of a figure inside the unhurried movement of someone who has been in the same place for a long time and has made his peace with the pace of it. Evie stood at the edge of the lot and let the rain run down the back of her neck and considered her options. She had $9. She had no phone. She had no destination. And then she saw the motorhome. It was parked at the far end of the lot, tucked behind the dumpsters at the edge of the property where the asphalt ended and the gravel began and the light from the overhang didn't quite reach. A motorhome from a different decade. She guessed 1989 from the body lines, though she couldn't have said exactly how she knew. 22 feet long, maybe a little more. White paint that had given up being white sometime during the previous administration and had settled instead into a blotchy, sun-bleached gray that ran in streaks where the rain was hitting it. Rust had climbed the wheel wells and crept along the lower body panels in dark organic patterns, the kind of rust that moves the way ivy moves, following the moisture, finding the seams. One of the windows had a crack running from the lower left corner halfway to the top, repaired with a strip of gray duct tape that had been there long enough to have cracked along its own edges. The tires were low but not flat. The tires looked, Evie thought, in the way that a person thinks strange things when they are standing in the rain at midnight, like they were tired. Like they had been waiting in one place for a very long time and were tired in the specific way that stillness makes you tired. Taped to the driver's side door was a piece of cardboard. The handwriting on it was large and slightly crooked, the letters pressed hard into the cardboard with what looked like a thick black marker. It read for sale. Runs sometimes. $9. Evie stared at it. $9. She had $9. She almost laughed. Not the kind of laugh that means something is funny. The kind of laugh that comes out of you when the universe has lined up a coincidence so precise and so absurd that the only appropriate response is a short, wet, involuntary sound somewhere between a laugh and a hiccup, because crying isn't available and silence seems wrong. She made that sound. It hung in the rain for a second and dissolved. $9 for a motorhome. $9 for a roof. $9 for a door that locked from the inside, and four walls that were not Marcus Vane's walls, and a floor that was not Marcus Vane's floor, and a space in the world that nobody had the authority to tell her to leave. She walked toward it slowly, the way you approach something you want very badly and are afraid of wanting too much. She reached out and put her hand flat against the side of it. The metal was cold and wet and patient. It did not pull away from her. It did not tell her to leave. It simply stood there in the rain being what it was, and for the first time since she had stepped off the porch on Delwood Street, something in the world was not actively pushing her away from it. That was when the voice came from behind her. She turned slowly. The man who had stepped out from behind the service bay was somewhere in his late 60s, maybe further. He was not tall, but he was big in the way a man gets big after 4 decades of physical work wide through the shoulders, in a way that had begun to slope forward from years of leaning over engines, thick through the forearms, solid through the middle, with the particular solidity of a man who has earned every pound of it. White hair under a faded green cap with the logo of a tractor company on the front. A beard going gray at the edges. A canvas work jacket the color of pine needles that had been something else a long time ago. Rain ran off the brim of his cap in a thin, steady stream, a small waterfall in front of his face that he seemed not to notice or mind. His eyes were tired, but they were not unkind. "You look a little lost, miss," he said. She did not say anything. He took a step closer, not threatening, just closing the distance so he could be heard without raising his voice over rain. He looked at the motorhome behind her with an expression she could not immediately name. It was not the look of a man regarding something he owned so much as the look of a man regarding something he had been keeping safe for someone else and was now evaluating whether the right someone had finally arrived. "How much do you have, miss?" he asked. She wiped the water out of her eyes with the back of her hand. "It says 9, she said. "I know what it says." His voice was steady and unhurried. He looked at the motorhome. Then he looked at her, not at her face precisely, but at the full picture of her. The backpack on her shoulder, the soaked hoodie, the shoes making wet sounds on the asphalt. He looked at the photograph tucked into the side pocket of the backpack, the one she'd shoved in there earlier when she was leaving and had forgotten to push all the way in. The corner of it was sticking out. The corner was getting wet. His eyes stopped on the photograph. They stayed there. They stayed there longer than they should have for a man looking at a stranger's backpack, and Evie felt the weight of that pause settle around her, the way cold air settles without announcement, just a sudden change in temperature that you register in your skin before you register it anywhere else. He was looking at the corner of the photograph. She could not see what he could see from where he was standing, but whatever he could see, he was looking at it with an intensity that was specific and private, the way a person looks at a face they recognize in a crowd after years of not expecting to see it. "How much do you have, miss?" he asked again. His voice had not changed, but something in the asking had. Evie reached into her front pocket. She did not know why she was going to tell him the truth. She was 17 years old and standing alone at midnight in the rain at an empty gas station, and every instinct she possessed was telling her to lie, to say she had the 10 to maintain whatever sliver of negotiating position a girl with $9 and nowhere to go could maintain. But the way he had asked the question the second time with that specific weight in it made lying feel like the wrong move, made it feel somehow like the kind of lie that would cost her more than it would save her. She pulled out the bills and the coins. A crumpled 5, Three singles folded together. Four quarters. A dime. The sum total of her material existence in the world at that moment held out in a wet palm in the rain. He looked at the money. He looked at her face. He looked at the backpack and the photograph some more. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and came out with a keyring. Two keys on a steel ring that had been used for a long time. One key was large and silver. The other was small and brass with a small notch missing from the head, the kind of notch a key gets when it has been used in something that put more pressure on it than a lock normally puts on a key, as if the door it opened had been at some point more stubborn than doors were supposed to be. He held the keys in his palm but did not yet give them to her. "My name is Rupert Calloway," he said. "Roop to everybody who's ever had occasion to use it. This is my station and that is my motor home, and $9 will do." She gave him the money. All of it. The wet five and the three damp singles and the four quarters and the dime. He took it without counting it. He folded the bills around the coins and put the whole wet handful of her life into the front pocket of his canvas jacket. Then he looked at her and said, "Miss, before I give you these keys, there is something I need to tell you about this vehicle." She waited. Rain came down. "There is a door," Rupert Calloway said. "At the back. End of the hallway past the sleeping area. Metal door, painted gray. Locked." She waited for him to continue. "What's behind it?" she asked. He worked his jaw for a moment. Not nervousness exactly. The expression of a man assembling words he had been holding for a long time and was now finally setting down in the right order. "That is the thing, miss. I do not know." She looked at him. "You own this motorhome, and you don't know what's behind a door inside it." "That's right. For how long?" He looked at the motorhome. He looked at the rain. He looked at the photograph still visible in the side pocket of her backpack, the corner of it darkening with water, the barely visible image in it that he had been looking at since she walked across the lot. 8 years, he said. "This vehicle has been parked in my lot for 8 years. I have kept the tires inflated. I have run the engine every 6 months to keep the seals from drying out. I have kept it clean and dry, and I have not opened the door at the back of the hallway in all of that time. I have wondered about it. I will not pretend otherwise. But I have not opened it. There is a difference between wondering about something and doing something about it, and it has never been my place to do something about that door." "Why are you selling it now?" Evie asked. He extended his hand, palm up, the two keys resting in it. "Because tonight," he said, "the right person finally walked into my lot." She looked at the keys. She looked at his face. She looked at the cardboard sign on the motorhome door, the large, slightly crooked letters. She looked at the rain falling between them. She looked at the keys again. She reached out and took them. They were warm from his pocket. They felt heavier than two keys had any right to feel, the specific weight of objects that have been waiting to be in the right hands for a long time and have accumulated the patience of that waiting in their mass. Rupert Calloway tipped the brim of his cap to her. Water ran off it in a thin stream. "There is a propane tank," he said. "It is full. The house battery is weak, but it will run the lights for a few hours before it needs charging. There is a water tank under the sink. Do not drink from it. There are water bottles in the cabinet above the stove. I put fresh ones in last week. Use those." Evie stared at him. "You put fresh water in last week," she said. "Yes, miss." "Why?" He did not answer that. He touched the brim of his cap a second time, a small, formal gesture that seemed to belong to an earlier decade. Then he turned and walked back toward the lit window of the office at his unhurried pace, the pace of a man who has somewhere he is going and has made his arrangements and has no remaining business in this part of the lot. At the office door, he stopped. He looked back at her. His face was just a pale shape under the brim of the green cap, the rain between them blurring his features into something she couldn't read at that distance. He did not wave. He did not say anything. He just looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has just watched it begin. Then he opened the office door and went inside, and the bell above it made a single small sound in the wet night, and the door closed behind him. Evie stood alone in the parking lot with a motorhome and two keys and the rain coming down around her. She turned and looked at the vehicle. She walked to the driver's side door. She fit the silver key into the lock. It turned smoothly the way a well-oiled lock turns, the way a lock turns when someone has been maintaining it regularly over years, which was information she filed away without processing yet, because there were only so many things she could process at once. The handle gave. The door swung open. She climbed in. The smell hit her first. Old upholstery and the ghost of pine air freshener that had given up its scent years ago, leaving only the faintest sweet memory of itself behind. Dust that had been undisturbed for a long time, but not neglected. And underneath all of it, something else. A smell she could not name precisely. The smell of a space that had been maintained and closed and kept and held. The smell of something that had been waiting with the kind of patience that does not require maintenance, that simply endures. It was dry inside. That was the second thing. It was dry and the wind did not reach here. And the rain that had been hitting her for the past 40 minutes was now hitting the metal roof above her head, instead drumming against it with a steady rhythm that was no longer her problem. It was no longer landing on her. It was landing on something that was hers, something between her and the weather, something that had cost her exactly $9 and everything she had. She closed the door. She locked it. The lock made a solid, satisfying sound, the sound of a mechanism doing its job correctly, the sound of something closing that could not be opened from outside without her permission. For the first time in 4 hours, Evie Harlow was inside a place where no one had the authority to tell her to leave. She stood in the entryway and let her eyes adjust. The layout was what she expected from a vehicle of this age and size. Driver and passenger seats up front, both cracked vinyl, both dark with years of use. A small dinette immediately behind the cab, a folding table, and two bench seats upholstered in a plaid pattern that had faded from whatever it had originally been to a muted brownish green. A kitchenette along the passenger side wall, a two-burner propane stove, a small sink, a cabinet above it, a half door to a narrow bathroom beyond, a sleeping area past the bathroom, and then a hallway short maybe 6 feet. And at the end of the hallway, exactly where Rupert Calloway had said it would be, a door. Metal. Gray. Locked. She did not go to it. Not yet. She sat at the dinette first and peeled her wet hoodie off over her head and draped it over the passenger seat to drip. She found a hand towel in a drawer under the sink that was clean, genuinely clean, and dried her face and her hands in the back of her neck. She opened the cabinet above the stove. 5 water bottles sealed, dated 3 weeks ago, lined up neatly. She took one and drank half of it standing at the counter, and the water was cold and clean and tasted like nothing at all. And it was the best thing she had tasted in longer than she could immediately account for. She sat back down at the dinette. She opened the cabinet under the sink and found nothing useful. She opened the cabinet above the driver's seat and found a folded wool blanket that smelled of cedar, a flashlight that worked when she shook it, and a small first aid kit still in its original sealed packaging. She opened the cabinet under the passenger window and found a stack of old newspapers, all of them dated years ago, and beneath the newspapers, pushed all the way to the back, something else. A metal box. Small, about the size of a thick paperback book. Gray, the same institutional gray as the door at the end of the hallway. Not rusted. Dusty with the particular quality of dust that accumulates on objects that have been left in one place without being touched, a fine, even layer that speaks not of neglect, but of deliberate stillness. It had been pushed to the very back of the cabinet behind the newspapers that had been placed there in a way that covered it without obviously covering it, accessible if you removed everything else first. She pulled it out and set it on the dinette. It wasn't locked, but the lid had been pressed down so firmly over so many years that it had bonded with the rim, sealed by time and pressure, into something that required the stubborn application of the flathead screwdriver she found in the kitchen drawer. She worked at it for 3 minutes. The lid resisted with the specific obstinacy of an object that has been closed for a long time and is not sure yet that the right person has arrived to open it. Then it gave. A small, dry crack like a knuckle popping. The lid came up. Inside was a stack of papers folded and tied together with a piece of plain cotton twine. Neat. The kind of neatness that is deliberate. The kind of arrangement a person makes when they want something to be found and read in a specific order by someone specific, and they have taken the time to arrange it that way because they understand that the order matters. Evie untied the twine. She set it aside. She unfolded the papers. They were old. Some were photocopies, the kind made on office equipment, slightly skewed on the page, the way office photocopies sometimes are. Some were handwritten notes in a small, careful script. Some had letterheads she didn't recognize. Most had dates on them. The dates ran across a span of several years, the earliest from 2012, the latest from late 2017. She began flipping through them with the careful attention of a person who does not yet know what she is looking at, but understands that it matters. She did not understand most of it. Technical language, engineering specifications, references to systems and components and project designations that meant nothing to her. Numbers arranged in tables she couldn't interpret. Memos addressed to people whose names she didn't know. She kept flipping. On the third page from the top, in a small clean row of typed text at the top of what appeared to be an official employee record form, she found a name. Fletcher Harlow. She stopped. The name sat on the page in the same small, precise typeface as everything else around it, unremarkable in its formatting, devastating in its content. She looked at it. She blinked. She looked at it again. She read it 4 times, 5 times. Then she read the rest of the line. Fletcher Harlow, Chief Systems Engineer, Restricted Access Division, Meridian Defense Technologies Incorporated. The room did not move. The rain kept drumming on the roof. The motorhome sat exactly where it had been sitting for 8 years in the lot behind Callaway's Gas and Service on the south edge of Millhaven, Oregon. Everything was physically still. But inside Evie Harlow, something shifted in the way that tectonic plates shift, not violently, not with the noise and spectacle of a disaster, but with the deep, irrevocable movement of one fixed thing sliding against another, and the world above it reorganizing itself into a new geography. Her father had been a mechanic. That was what she had believed for 8 years, because that was what she had been told for 8 years, and she had been 9 years old when they told her. And 9 years old is too young to know the right questions to ask about a dead man, and old enough to absorb the story you're given about him as fundamental truth. He had been a mechanic. He had driven a pickup truck. He had worked in a shop somewhere, the details of which she had never quite pinned down, and he had come home in the evening smelling of motor oil and had helped her with her homework at the kitchen table and had sat at the foot of her bed on rainy nights talking in his low, even voice. A mechanic, Chief Systems Engineer, Restricted Access Division. Her hands had started shaking. Not from cold, though cold was still in her bones from the walk. From something else. From the particular physical sensation of holding in your hands the proof that the floor of a thing you have been standing on for 8 years is not where you thought it was, and has never been where you thought it was, and everything you have been building on top of it has been built on a surface that was not what it appeared. She kept reading. She flipped pages. His name appeared again, and again. His signature, which she recognized immediately, and with a physical certainty that was different from reading. Because reading was a cognitive act, and recognizing his signature was something else entirely, a body-level recognition. The kind that lives in the muscles of your hands from years of tracing someone's name on the backs of receipts and the corners of homework pages and the insides of birthday cards when you are trying to keep the shape of a person from dissolving entirely. She had spent years keeping the shape of him from dissolving. And here it was on a page dated March 2016, at the bottom of a memorandum about something called Project Iron Veil, in the small, neat, left-leaning signature of Fletcher Harlow, Chief Systems Engineer. She went through all of it. She could not understand most of it, but she understood enough. She understood that her father had worked for Meridian Defense Technologies for at least 9 years. She understood that he had risen from an entry-level engineering position in 2008 to department head by 2014 and to chief systems engineer of something called the Restricted Access Division by 2016. She understood that Project Iron Veil was the primary project of that division. She understood from the documents themselves that Iron Veil was described officially and repeatedly as a guidance system for defensive military applications. And she understood from the last several pages in the bundle that something had gone wrong. The handwriting in the margins of those last pages was different, not the careful, measured engineering script of the earlier documents. This was faster, more urgent, pressed harder into the paper. On one page in a small block of handwritten text in the margin, "This is not defense." On another page, lower down tighter, Marsh approved it. Marsh arranged the buyers, and then on a page near the end, a single word underlined twice in red pen Iron Veil. And on the final page, the one with the latest date dated September 2017, a single line of handwritten text. 1742 Cresswell Industrial Parkway, Mill Haven, Oregon. She recognized the address. Cresswell Industrial Parkway ran along the river on the north edge of town, past the old mill site out toward the newer commercial development that had gone up in the last decade after the county had rezoned the riverfront. She had ridden past it on the school bus 100 times. Glass buildings, corporate landscaping, parking lots full of cars. She had never paid it particular attention. It was just a stretch of the route between here and somewhere else. Meridian Defense Technologies. Here, in her town, 20 minutes from where she was sitting, she set the last page down on the table. She sat with her hands flat on the papers and the rain on the roof and the gray door at the end of the hallway and the weight of it all. She sat with 8 years of believing one thing and the new cold specific knowledge that the thing she had believed was not the whole truth. Her mother had lied. Not cruelly, perhaps. Not with the intention of harm. But she had stood at the kitchen sink and at the kitchen table and at the edge of Evie's bed and across every dinner and every ordinary evening for 8 years, and she had let her daughter believe her father was a mechanic who had died in a fog on Route 12, and she had said nothing. There was a reason for that. There was always a reason. Evie had learned that much. The world was full of things people didn't say, and most of those unsaid things had reasons attached to them, and most of those reasons had to do with protection, which could look from the outside like a lot of different things. She pulled her phone from her front pocket. Still dead. She found the 12-volt outlet near the driver's seat and plugged the charging cable in. The phone began to draw power. The screen lit up with the low battery icon. She watched it for a moment, then carried it back to the dinette and set it on the table in front of her while she waited for enough charge to make a call. She waited 15 minutes. The battery crept to 7%. She dialed home. It rang 4 times. Then Marcus Vane's voice, smooth and unhurried and completely unsurprised. "Evelyn," he said, giving her full name, its full weight the way he always used it when he wanted her to understand that the conversation was already over before it began. "I want to talk to my mother," Evie said. "Your mother is resting. She's been very upset since you left. Put her on the phone. She's not available right now." "I will speak to my mother," she said. She kept her voice level. There was a pause, not a long one. 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then she heard the quality of the background sound change the way background sound changes when a person moves from one room to another. And when Marcus spoke again, his voice had gone lower, quieter. The voice of a man who has moved to a part of the house where he does not want to be overheard. "Listen to me carefully," he said. She listened. "I don't know where you are. I don't need to know. You made a choice tonight. That choice has consequences." He paused. "Whatever you found, wherever you are, whatever you think you're going to do about it, I am telling you right now to stop. Put it down. Walk away from it. This is not something you understand, and it is not something you are equipped to handle, and if you push it further, something will happen that nobody can fix." She felt the cold in the motorhome more acutely. Not the ambient cold, a specific cold. A cold that settled in her chest and her hands. "What did you say?" she asked. "You heard me. What do I think I found, Marcus?" His voice went quieter still. The kind of quiet that is not calmness, but its opposite. The kind of quiet that a very controlled person arrives at when they are managing something large and dangerous and prefer not to show it. I'm only going to say this once, Evelyn. Whatever path you think you're about to walk down, stop. For your own sake, for your mother's sake. Because the people who are involved in this are not the kind of people who stop. And the last person who thought they could pull a thread on this ran out of road on Route 12. The kind of accident he said that runs in your family. The line went dead. Evie sat with the phone in her hand and looked at it. The rain kept drumming on the roof. The lights in the gas station office were still on. Somewhere down the county road, a truck was running through its gears on the grade, the engine note rising and falling in the wet dark. She sat very still. The kind of accident that runs in your family. He had not said that carelessly. Nothing Marcus Vane did was careless. He had said it deliberately, specifically in the voice of a man who wanted her to understand something without being on record as having said it plainly. He had said it because he wanted her afraid, and because he wanted her to know, without being able to prove it, that he knew more about what happened on Route 12 than a grieving stepfather was supposed to know. He was not a bystander. He had never been a bystander. The man who had sat in her father's chair and eaten at her father's table and slept in her father's bed and driven her mother into the particular, subdued version of herself that had replaced the person Cora Harlow had been before that man had known. He had known before he ever walked through the front door. He had known because the people who had arranged the accident on Route 12 were the same people who had sent him or let him come or placed him there, for reasons she did not yet fully understand, but could feel beginning to assemble themselves from the documents spread across the dinette in front of her. Evie set the phone down very carefully. She looked at the papers. She looked at the gray door at the end of the hallway. She looked at the photograph in her hoodie pocket, which she took out now and laid flat on the table. Her father's face looking up at her in the low light, the denim jacket, the squinting smile, the 9-year-old version of herself who had known nothing and been loved completely. "Hey, Dad," she said quietly to the photograph. Her voice was steady, steadier than she expected. She looked at the gray door. "Tomorrow," she said, "tomorrow I am going to open that door, and I am going to find out what you left me, and I am going to figure out what to do with it." She put the papers back in their order and retied the twine and placed the bundle carefully at the bottom of her backpack beneath the spare shirt, beneath the paperback with his photograph inside. She lifted the bench seat of the dinette. There was a small storage compartment beneath it, the kind built into every cubic inch of a motorhome by designers who understand that people who live in small spaces need places to put things. She put the metal box in there instead, under the corner of the tarp that was folded at the back of the compartment, and she let the bench seat down over it. Then she took the blanket from the overhead cabinet and lay down on the bench seat with her hoodie balled under her head and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The wool smelled of cedar. It was warm. The rain kept coming down on the roof above her, not punishing now, just persistent. The sound of something that keeps going because stopping has never occurred to it. She listened to it and felt the motorhome settle around her in small creaking degrees, the way an old structure accommodates itself to a new presence, finding the new balance adjusting. She was inside a place that was hers. She had a door that locked from the inside. She had $9 worth of roof between her and the rain, and a gray door at the end of the hallway that had been waiting for 8 years for someone who was not Rupert Calloway to open it. And she knew now with the particular cold certainty of a girl who has just learned that the floor of her life has been built over a depth she didn't know was there, that the door had been waiting specifically for her. Her father had been a chief systems engineer. Her father had worked for a company called Meridian Defense Technologies. Her father had written in the margins of classified documents in late 2017 that something called Project Iron Veil was not what it was supposed to be, and that a man named Marsh had approved the buyers. And her stepfather, in the low, controlled voice of a man who had always known more than he let on, had just told her that Fletcher Harlow's accident was not the kind of accident it was supposed to look like. She stared at the ceiling. The rain fell. Somewhere outside, Rupert Calloway sat in the lit office of his gas station and drank his coffee and did not move and did not explain himself, waiting in the way a man waits who has been waiting for 8 years already and has gotten very good at it. And in the motorhome at the edge of the lot, Evie Harlow lay in the dark with the cedar smell of the blanket and the drum of the rain and the weight of what she had found. And she did not sleep for a long time. And when she finally did, she dreamed of her father. And the dream was wordless, and she could feel in it that he was trying to tell her something, and she woke before he could finish. And the gray door at the end of the hallway was still there, waiting patient as rain, patient as rust. Patient as a father who has arranged everything in exactly the right order and is trusting his daughter to follow it. Morning came the way mornings come after nights. Like that one reluctantly in pieces, the dark giving way, not all at once but in degrees. The black outside the motorhome windows going first to a deep charcoal and then to a flat grainy gray that was not quite light and not quite dark and had no warmth in it whatsoever. The rain had stopped some time before dawn. The world outside smelled of wet asphalt and wet pine and the particular cold metal smell of an Oregon morning in October that has been thoroughly rained on and is not finished being cold about it. Evie sat up on the bench seat. She remembered where she was in pieces, the way you reassemble a place after sleep detail by detail. The plaid upholstery under her, the cedar blanket, the motorhome, the gray door at the end of the hallway still there, still closed, still waiting. She sat with her elbows on her knees and her hands loose and looked at the hallway for a moment. The door had not moved. Of course it had not moved. It had not moved in 8 years. It was not going to move in the night. She needed to eat before she opened it. More than that, she needed information. She had the documents from the metal box, and she had what the documents told her, which was significant but incomplete. She had names, she had dates, she had the outline of something large and deliberate and dangerous. But she did not have the shape of it, yet the full three-dimensional shape that you could only get by talking to someone who had been standing inside it. The documents were evidence. What she needed now was context. She washed her face with a water bottle, dried it on the clean hand towel, pulled on her spare shirt under her hoodie, and braided her hair back tight. She put the photograph in the inside pocket of her hoodie against her chest, where she had carried it since she was 12, and had decided she needed it close to her body rather than just in her bag. She could feel the small, flat square of it when she pressed her hand against her sternum, which was something she did more than she admitted to herself. She took the bundle of papers from the backpack and looked through them one more time in the gray morning light. The handwritten annotation was still there on the fourth page from the top, her father's script. In the right margin, small and careful, a series of notations she had partially decoded the night before. Most of them were still beyond her. But one line written at the bottom of a page that appeared to be an internal routing memo from early 2017 was clear enough. BF Blue Sparrow Diner safe. She had seen a diner on Main Street when she had walked through town last night. She had seen the sign. She had not paid attention to the name. She was paying attention to it now. She put the papers back in the backpack under the spare shirt in the paperback and pulled the straps onto her shoulders. She unlocked the motorhome door. She stepped out into the cold morning and locked it behind her. Rupert Calloway was already in his folding chair inside the open service bay, a thermos cup in one hand, watching the road with the unhurried attention of a man who has been watching a particular stretch of road for so many years that the watching has become less an activity and more a state of being. He looked up when she came across the lot. He did not wave. He did not offer anything. He simply looked at her in the way he had looked at her the night before, measuring and patient and carrying something that he was not going to offer until she had earned it. She nodded at him. He nodded back. She walked into town. Main Street in Mill Haven at 7:15 in the morning was a study in what a town looks like when it has scaled itself back to match its diminished circumstances and made a reasonable peace with the result. 3 storefronts with 4 lease signs. The hardware store with its lights just coming on. The pharmacy with its door propped open and a woman in a green vest sweeping the sidewalk in front of it with the methodical sweep of someone who has swept that same sidewalk every morning for years and expects to sweep it for years more. Two men on the bench in front of the hardware store with paper cups of coffee watching the street with the comfortable authority of men who have appointed themselves the morning observers of a town that does not object to being observed. The Blue Sparrow Diner was on the east side of Main Street between the pharmacy and a barber shop that appeared to be open 3 days a week based on the handwritten hours card in the window. The sign was a painted tin oval, a blue bird with one wing that was slightly different in color from the other, a replacement from some previous damage. The front window lettering said "Home Cooking" in white paint that had been touched up at least twice in living memory and was starting to need it again. A light was on inside. The smell came through the door before she opened it. Coffee, bacon, something baked and yeasty and warm from somewhere in the back. The smell of bread in an oven of dough that had been given the time it needed and was now repaying that patience in the currency of smell. She had not eaten since the day before yesterday, a fact she had been managing by not thinking about it, and could not continue managing because her body had made other arrangements. She pushed the door open. A small bell tinkled overhead. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her early 60s, round-faced in the pleasant, open way of women who have spent their lives feeding people and have absorbed something of the abundance of that work into the lines of their face. Reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, hair pulled back in a gray-streaked bun that had been the same bun for probably 30 years, the kind of hairstyle that achieves perfect functionality early and sees no reason to change. She was wearing a blue denim apron over a flannel shirt, and her hands were dusted with flour. And when she looked at Evie, she did the specific thing that certain women of a certain age and occupation do, which is to look at a person all the way, not just at the surface of them, not just at the clothes and the age and the hair, but at the whole story being told by the sum of those details. The wet sneakers, the backpack, the careful way Evie was holding herself, the particular uprightness of a person who is conserving something, the hollow quality around her eyes that a night without proper sleep and a week without proper eating produces. The woman set down the dish she was holding. "Sit down, honey," she said. Evie sat at the counter. The woman filled a coffee cup before Evie had asked for one, poured two small creamers into it without being told, and set it in front of her. Then she disappeared into the kitchen for a few minutes and came back with a plate. Eggs, two of them, over easy, the yolks unbroken and glossy. 3 strips of bacon. A biscuit with a pat of butter melting into the top of it, spreading into the warm bread in slow golden rivulets. A small glass of orange juice. Evie looked at the plate. "I have money," she said. "Not a lot, but I have some." The woman leaned on the counter with both elbows. Her name tag read Blythe in the small plastic letters of a tag that has been worn on the same apron for years. But there was a strip of tape under the name, and on the tape in small permanent marker letters someone had written out. "Eat first," she said. "We'll sort the rest out after." Evie ate. She ate the way a person eats when they have been trying not to think about how hungry they are and have suddenly been given permission to stop trying. At first carefully with the fork cutting things into pieces and eating them in sequence. Then less carefully, then not carefully at all. She ate the eggs and the bacon and the biscuit and drank the coffee and the orange juice and did not look up from the plate until there was nothing left on it. Dot watched her without watching her. She moved around the diner in the practiced way of someone who has spent decades in a small commercial kitchen, efficient and unhurried and attentive to everything, without appearing to pay attention to anything in particular. She refilled the coffee of the only other customer, a heavy-set man in a work jacket reading the local paper at the far end of the counter. She checked something in the kitchen. She wiped the section of counter near the register. She was never more than 10 feet from Evie. When Evie set down her fork, Dot came back and set a small plate in front of her with a slice of apple pie on it. "Compliments of the house," she said. Evie looked up. "Why are you being kind to me?" Dot leaned on the counter. "Because you walked in here looking like the world threw you out," she said. "And I have a rule in this diner. The world does not get to throw a person out twice." Evie looked at the pie. Then she looked back up at Dot. She had rehearsed how she was going to do this on the walk from Callaway's. She had decided on the direct approach because she had no time for the indirect one, and no particular skill at it anyway. I found a note, she said, in my father's handwriting. It said Blue Sparrow Diner and your initials. Dot's hands, which had been moving with their habitual efficiency along the counter, went still. What are your father's initials? Dot asked. F.H. Evie said. Fletcher Harlow. Dot looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the man at the far end of the counter. He was reading about the high school football team. He was not listening. Dot reached back and untied her apron strings, retied them, the unconscious motion of a person who is deciding something important and needs her hands to be doing something while she decides it. Come sit in the corner booth with me, she said quietly. They sat across from each other in the back corner of the diner, away from the windows in the booth that was farthest from the door and closest to the kitchen entrance. Dot folded her hands on the table. She looked at Evie with the same careful, comprehensive look she had given her at the door, only more so now, with more information available to inform it. Your father, she said slowly, came into this diner every Tuesday morning for 9 years. Evie's hands went flat on the table. Black coffee. Dot continued. The breakfast special. He liked his eggs runny. He always took the sports page from the rack by the door and brought it back to the counter when he was done, so I could see how the girls' softball team was doing that week. He left a $5 tip on a $6 check every single time. I never once saw him leave less. She paused. I knew your father very well, honey. I knew his face and his voice, and the way he looked when something was worrying him, and the way he looked when it wasn't. I knew the difference between his Tuesday face and his other face. Evie was very still. Why didn't you say something when I first came in? Because when you first came in, sweetheart, I didn't know who you were. I saw a girl who needed to eat. She paused. I had no way to know. Evie looked down at the table. She looked back up. Dot. What do you know about a company called Meridian Defense Technologies? The change in Dot's face was small and specific. Not fear exactly. The recognition that she was being asked to cross a threshold she had been standing at the edge of for 8 years and had never been sure she would be asked to cross. I know enough not to discuss them by name in a public place, Dot said. And I know a man who knows more than I do. Evie waited. Dot reached into the pocket of her apron and came out with a small notepad and a stub of pencil and wrote a name and an address. She folded the paper and slid it across the table without looking down at it, the gesture of someone who has been waiting to make it. Whitfield Tate, she said. Everybody calls him Whit. He worked the regional news beat for 32 years, retired in 2019. He lives out past the boat launch on Lake Lawson Little Cedar Cabin on the South Shore. He'll be home. He's always home. Tell him Blythe Fenwick sent you. Tell him it's about Fletcher. Evie reached for the paper. Dot did not move her hand away, but she kept it on the table near the paper for a moment. Honey, before you go to him, I want to tell you something. Your father sat in this exact booth this corner one Tuesday morning in the fall of 2017. He ordered his coffee and he didn't drink it. He just sat and looked out the window for 20 minutes. I went to check on him because that wasn't like him, and he looked at me and his face was different. Not scared exactly, but decided. Like a man who has made up his mind about something hard. Evie did not move. He said to me, Dot continued, he said, Blythe, I need you to remember a name for me. He said, if anything ever happens to me, and if a girl comes in here asking questions, a girl with dark hair and gray eyes who doesn't ask for anything she needs, I want you to tell her that name. What was the name, Evie asked, though she already knew. Conrad Marsh, Dot said, and the company was Meridian Defense Technologies. The man at the counter turned a page of his newspaper. Outside, a car went past on Main Street, its tires still wet sounding from the night's rain. He told you, Evie said. He specifically told you. I asked him why he was telling a diner owner, Dot said. He said because nobody ever notices a woman behind a counter. He said it was the safest place in Millhaven to leave something. She stopped. Her eyes were bright, but she was not going to cry. Evie could see that. She was the kind of woman who had decided a long time ago, where the line was between feeling a thing and being undone by it, and she had held that line for years. She reached across and put two fingers on the back of Evie's hand for just a second. Your father loved you, honey. Whatever happened to him, whatever he did or didn't do, whatever was done to him, he loved you. Evie paid $4 for the breakfast. Dot took it and then quietly slipped a paper bag into her backpack on the way out. Evie felt the weight of it and did not comment. She had a feeling that commenting would result in an argument she could not win and did not have time for. She walked back out onto Main Street with the folded paper in her hand and Whitfield Tate's address on it, and the name Conrad Marsh sitting in the center of her chest like a stone. The bus that ran from Main Street to the north end of town went as far as the Lake Road junction. She found the schedule posted inside the drugstore, a photocopied sheet taped to the inside of the window. The next one was in 20 minutes. She sat on the bench in front of the hardware store 2 seats down from the two men with their coffee cups and waited. They glanced at her once and returned to their conversation. She thought about what Dot had told her. She thought about her father sitting in that corner booth with an untouched cup of coffee and the look of a man who had made up his mind about something hard. She tried to place that image alongside the image she had carried for 8 years, the one from the photograph, the workbench, and the denim jacket, and the squinting smile. She tried to find the through line between those two men, the one who smiled in the afternoon sun with his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and the one who sat in the corner of a diner with a decided look and a name he needed to leave in a safe place. They were the same man. She knew that. She had always known there was more to him than what she had been given. The way children know things, their parents have decided not to tell them, through the texture of silences and the quality of certain looks, in the particular way that adults stop talking when you walk into a room. She had known it and not been able to do anything with it because she had been 9 and then 10 and then 12 and then 14, and she had not had the tools. She had the tools now. They were crude and incomplete, and she was working with a significant deficit of information, but she had them. The bus came. She took it to the Lake Road junction and got off and walked. The road to Lake Lawson ran north through second-growth forest parallel to the river for the first mile, and then curving east toward the lake. The gravel surface was wet and soft from the night's rain, and her shoes were still not dry from the walk the night before, which meant that wet gravel was an incremental inconvenience rather than a new development which she found she could accommodate. She ate half the sandwich from Dot's bag while she walked. Roast beef, sharp cheddar, a thin spread of mustard. She ate it slowly and tasted it more than she had tasted the breakfast, which had been consumed in a state of urgent need that left little room for anything else. The cabin sat on a slight rise above the south shore of the lake, back from the water by about 200 feet, sheltered on 3 sides by Douglas fir that had been growing long enough to have forgotten what the cabin was like when it was new. Cedar shingles gone silver gray with weather, a stovepipe poking through the roof with a thin thread of smoke trailing from it, a covered porch with 2 wooden rocking chairs and a small side table with a coffee cup on it, an American flag folded over the back of the second chair with the precise triangular fold of military custom. A dog the color of old snow lay on the porch boards and lifted its head as she came up the drive. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "I'm looking for Whitfield Tate," she said. The man in the first rocking chair lowered a paperback book. He was tall, even sitting down lean in the way of men who stay lean, not through effort, but through disposition, through the constitution of a person who forgets to eat when something is on his mind. Late 60s, white hair cut close, a face that had lived in weather for a long time and had the lines in the weathering to prove it. Half glasses perched on the end of a straight nose, a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar. He looked at her over the top of the glasses with the measured attention of a man who spent 30 years interviewing people and had developed through that practice the particular skill of reading a person's story from their posture before they open their mouth. "You found him," he said. "Evie Harlow," she said. "Blythe Fenwick sent me." Something in his posture shifted, not visibly, not in any way that most people would have detected, but she was watching carefully. "Fletcher's girl," he said. "Yes, sir." He set the paper back on the side table next to the coffee cup. He looked at the dog, which put its head back down on its paws with a sigh. Mind the third step, he said. The board's been loose for 2 years, and I keep not fixing it. She came up skipping the third step and sat in the chair he gestured to. The folded flag rested against her shoulder. Neither of them moved it. How old are you, Miss Harlow? 17. He looked at her for a long time. People used to say you look like him. People were right. He picked up his coffee. He drank. He set it down. He looked out at the lake, which was the color of old pewter under the October sky, flat and still and completely indifferent to the human drama being conducted on its shore. Your father came to me in the spring of 2017, Whit Tate said. He had a story, the kind of story a man in my position spends a career hoping somebody walks in and hands him and then mostly never does. He gave me 3 months, documents, names, source material I could corroborate. I started writing it. I had a draft maybe half finished. He paused. Then in August he stopped coming. Missed a meeting, then 2 more. Then the calls stopped going through. I waited. I kept the draft. I did not publish it because without him, I could not protect the sourcing, and without the sourcing, the story was a liability rather than a record. Then February of 2018, his truck on Route 12, Evie said. Yes. She looked at the lake. What happened in those 6 months between August and February? Whit Tate set his coffee cup down on the porch board beside his chair with a deliberate, quiet placement. He took off his half glasses and folded them and put them in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. He turned and looked at her with the expression of a man arriving at the thing he has been building toward. Miss Harlow, he said, what I am about to tell you is something I have never put in print. Something I never will put in print, because in print it becomes a claim, and claims require proof, and the proof I have is circumstantial. But you ask me what I know, and you have a right to know it, so I am going to tell you. She waited. There was no body in that car. The words landed on the porch air between them and stayed there. Evie did not move. What do you mean, she said. The accident on Route 12, Whit said. The fire, the pickup truck over the embankment, the state troopers at your door at 6 in the morning, the closed casket service. There was no intact body in that vehicle. The medical examiner who filed the death certificate was a man named Bert Halverson, who had been on contractual retainer with Meridian Defense for 11 years at the time of his signature, and who died of a stroke in 2021 without ever giving a public statement about the case. The certificate cited blunt force trauma and thermal injuries consistent with a high-speed vehicle accident and fire. No autopsy was requested by the family. Evie's throat had tightened. My mother, she said. Your mother did not request one. That is true. Whether your mother was in a condition to request anything in February of 2018 is a question I have thought about for 8 years and never felt it was my place to ask her. She looked at the lake. The world outside the cabin was very quiet in the particular way of lake shores in October. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of things pausing before the next movement. Birds waiting, water waiting. Everything waiting for something to determine what comes next. Mr. Tate, she said, are you telling me my father might not be dead? Whit was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I am telling you that I do not know what happened to Fletcher Harlow in the 6 months between August of 2017, when he stopped coming to me, and February of 2018, when his truck was found. I have a theory. I have had it since February of 2018. I cannot prove it. Tell me the theory. He picked up his coffee. He held it for a moment. My theory is this. In August of 2017, your father learned that Conrad Marsh knew what he was doing, had known for some time, had been watching him and deciding what to do about him. So your father made a decision. He stopped, everything went silent, disappeared. He arranged his own exit, a truck, a wallet, a watch, a stretch of fog on Route 12. He made himself dead on paper and walked away from it. Because a man who is dead on paper is a man they stop looking for. Evie's hands were cold in her lap. He got out in August, Whit continued. He was free for some months. Maybe he kept working on what he knew. Maybe he went somewhere and made arrangements and kept moving. But the people at Meridian did not stop looking. Conrad Marsh is not the kind of man who closes a ledger and moves on. He looked at Evie. I think they found your father in the late winter of 2018. I think they found him and they ended it the real ending this time. And then they arranged the truck on Route 12 to provide a public record. A story that was already half written, you see, by me. So they finished writing it. He gave himself up, Evie said. Her voice was almost level. I believe that is what happened, yes. He knew they were going to find him eventually. He knew if he kept running, they would follow him wherever he went, and anyone near him would be in the path of that. So he stopped running. I believe that is what he decided, yes. The loon called somewhere out on the water, the sound carrying flat across the surface. In the cold air, a long falling note that had nothing to do with the conversation on the porch and was paying no attention to it. Evie did not realize she was crying until she felt the warmth on her face. She wiped it with the cuff of her hoodie without looking away from the lake. Whit looked away from her and gave her the lake to look at and did not speak until she was ready. I have papers, she said when she could. He turned back. His papers. I found them in a metal box in the motorhome. Whit went very still. What kind of papers? Memos, personnel records, his handwriting in the margins, notes about Project Iron Veil, about Conrad Marsh, about buyers. Whit's coffee cup stopped moving. Project Iron Veil, he said. Yes, sir. He set the cup down. He looked at the railing of the porch. He looked at the lake. He looked back at her. Miss Harlow, where are these papers now? In the motorhome, hidden under the bench seat. Not on you. No, sir. Good. He leaned forward slightly. Do not move them. Do not photograph them. Do not email anything about them or discuss them on a phone line. Do not show them to anyone you have not already decided to trust with your life. Do you understand? Yes, sir. He was quiet for a moment, the quality of his silence shifting, becoming something denser and more deliberate. Those papers are not the destination, Miss Harlow. If your father left them where he left them, in a place only you would find, they are instructions. A map. The destination is something else, something he hid separately, something more direct. The papers tell you what he knew. What you need is what he recorded. She looked at him. How do you know there's a recording? Because I knew, Fletcher Harlow Whit said, and I knew what he was building toward when he came to me. He was building towards something that could not be argued with. Not documents, not memos, not technical specifications that require expert testimony to explain. Something immediate, something that speaks for itself. The gray door, Evie said. He looked at her. There's a locked door at the back of the motorhome, she said. Metal, gray. He told me about it when he sold me the vehicle. Said he had never opened it in 8 years. Rupert Calloway sold you that motorhome. Yes, sir. Whit sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long time. The dog sighed on the porch boards and repositioned itself by 3 inches and was still again. Rupert Calloway, Whit said, finally was your father's closest friend. They met at Oregon State in the late 90s. Calloway left before graduating, came back to Millhaven to take over his father's station. Your father finished his degree and went on to Meridian. They stayed close. After the accident, Calloway withdrew. People assume grief. That is likely what it was, among other things. Evie said nothing. The motorhome has been in his lot for 8 years, Miss Harlow. I know. And he has not opened the door. No. Do you understand what that means? She understood. She had been understanding it since the previous night when Rupe had told her. She had been sitting with the understanding of it, the way you sit with something that is too large to look at all at once, approaching it from the edges. He left Rupe the motorhome and the instructions, she said. Rupe kept it and waited. And when I walked into his lot last night, Rupe sold it to me. Whit nodded. My father set the price 8 years ago. He set it at $9. Yes, because I was 9 when he left. Yes, Whit said. That is who your father was. She stood up. Whit looked up at her. She was already on her feet the way she had been on her feet before she knew she was going to stand the specific urgency of a body that has received the last piece of information it needs and has computed the next action before the mind has had time to articulate it. Go back, Whit said. But walk, don't run. She was already at the steps. Miss Harlow. She stopped. The door, he said. Whatever is behind it. It was put there for you. Not for me, not for the FBI. For you first. You will know what to do with it when you see it. She went down the steps, skipping the third one. She walked back along the lake road through the wet gravel with both hands at her sides and her eyes forward and her mind running at a speed that had nothing to do with her walking pace, assembling and reassembling the information she had into the shape of what she now believed to be true, testing it from different angles, looking for the place where it didn't hold. It held. Every time she tested it, it held. Her father had been an engineer, not a mechanic. He had discovered that Conrad Marsh was using Meridian's defense technology for unauthorized sales to private buyers. He had taken that information to a journalist. He had been discovered. He had tried to disappear and had succeeded for 6 months and had then been found and killed. And the truck on Route 12 was the paperwork, the official version of a story that had been written in a very different ink. And before all of that, before the disappearance and the death in the official story, he had left a map. He had left it in a motorhome in the lot of his best friend's gas station, and he had set the price at $9, and he had told the only other people who knew about it to wait and to say nothing and to let his daughter find it herself because she was his daughter, and she would find it if she was looking. She was looking. The motorhome was where she had left it. Roop was in his service bay when she came across the lot. He looked up. She went directly to the toolbox by the hydraulic lift, lifted the lid, and found the crowbar exactly where he had told her it would be the previous night without having been asked. It was black steel, heavy, cold, 2.5 feet of leverage. She picked it up. She turned. Roop was watching her from his chair. She held up the crowbar. He nodded once. She went to the motorhome. Inside, she locked the door behind her and walked directly down the hallway without stopping in the main cabin. The gray metal door at the end was the same as it had been the night before, the same as it had been for 8 years. She had spent the night 10 feet from it and not opened it because she had needed sleep and information first, and now she had both not enough of either, but enough to proceed. She raised the crowbar. The first swing rang off the door with a flat, hard sound that traveled down the metal hallway and out through the walls of the vehicle and into the morning air. Her hands stung from the shock of it. The door showed nothing, not even a mark at the point of contact. She tightened her grip and hit it again. A small dent appeared near the lock plate. She did not count her swings. She was not thinking in terms of counts or progress or the measured application of force in optimized increments. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about the morning the troopers came to the door and about 8 years of believing a story that was not the whole story, and about her mother's shoulders at the kitchen sink on Delwood Street not 12 hours ago, and about a man who left a $5 tip on a $6 breakfast every Tuesday for 9 years while he was carrying something that would have killed most people just from the weight of it. She drove the crowbar into the lock the way her father had once shown her to drive a nail, not from the wrist, not from the elbow, from the whole body, the hips and the shoulders and the arms and the hands all moving together in sequence, the full weight of her behind it. On the 17th swing, the lock cracked. It was a small, dry sound, not loud, not dramatic. The sound of a mechanism reaching the end of what it was designed to withstand. The door shuddered in its frame, and the metal around the lock plate buckled inward 1/2 inch, and the whole thing shifted. She set the crowbar against the wall. She put her palm flat against the door and pushed. It swung inward. Cold air came out to meet her. Not the trapped, stale air of a sealed room, but cold that had a clarity to it. Maintained cold, the kind that comes from a space that has been kept at a consistent low temperature on purpose. She felt it move across her shoulders and down the hallway behind her like a slow exhalation. like the breath of something that has been holding it for a very long time. She stepped inside. The space was small, 4 feet wide, 6 feet deep, built into the rear section of the motorhome, in the place where the spare utility storage should have been. The walls were lined with foam insulation the color of old cream. The floor was a single sheet of steel plate. A battery-powered LED fixture mounted in the ceiling came on by itself when she crossed the threshold, activated by a motion sensor, flooding the space with clean white light that made everything in it immediately and precisely visible. It was not a storage room, it was an archive. 3 walls were lined with narrow shelving, the shelves precisely spaced and deliberately loaded. 3-ring binders with spines labeled in her father's handwriting. A row of small metal cases, each the size of a thick paperback. A stack of manila folders bound with rubber bands. A row of audio cassette tapes in plastic sleeves, each one dated. A laptop computer, perhaps 10 years old, the power cord coiled beside it in a neat figure 8. A small fireproof lockbox on the bottom shelf. On the wall directly opposite the door at eye level in a plain black frame was a photograph. It was her. Age 9, the denim jacket 2 sizes too big, standing in front of a Christmas tree in the house on Carmichael Street, holding up a drawing she had made of a house, a child's drawing. Boxy and hopeful smoke coming out of the chimney in the round puffs that children draw when they want to make a house look warm. She was smiling the way she had smiled before she knew there were things in the world that would stop her from smiling like that. Below the photograph, taped to the wall with 2 pieces of ordinary masking tape, was a folded sheet of paper. On the outside, in her father's handwriting, one word: Evelyn. She crossed to it. She lifted it from the tape, carefully not tearing it. She unfolded it. It was 1 full page, handwritten, the same small, left-leaning script she had been reading all night in the documents from the metal box. She stood in the cold white light of the hidden room and read it. Evelyn, it said, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry. I want you to know that I tried to make it not so. I want you to know that I tried. I worked for a company called Meridian Defense Technologies. I started there in 2008 in good faith, believing I was building things that would protect people. I was an engineer. For many years, I believed that was what I was doing. I was wrong about what I was building. The project I led was called Iron Veil. It was presented to the Department of Defense as a targeting guidance system for defensive military applications. It was not that. It was a weapon system of a type and capability that should not exist, and it was never intended for the purpose it was described as serving. In early 2017, I discovered that Conrad Marsh, the chief executive of Meridian, had arranged the sale of the core Iron Veil technology to 2 foreign buyers. He was not selling it to enemies of this country. He was not that simple a man. He was selling it to whoever had the money without condition and without accountability, while accepting defense contracts from our own government for the same work. He was lying to his engineers. He was lying to his government. He was lying to everyone for money, and he was very good at it because he had been doing it for years before I noticed. I gathered everything I could. I took it to a journalist I trusted. We worked together for 3 months. Then I learned that Marsh had found out what I was doing. He had known for some time. He had been watching me and deciding, I am going to disappear. The accident you were told about, the one on Route 12, it will not be real. I will not be in that truck. I will be somewhere else continuing to work. And when I have enough to finish this and protect you and your mother, I am going to come home. If you are reading this, something went wrong. I did not come home. I am sorry, Evelyn. I am so sorry. In the fireproof box on the bottom shelf, the combination is 3 numbers. You know them. Inside is a digital recorder. The recording on it is the most important thing I have ever made. Take it to Whitfield Tate. He will know what to do. I love you. I have loved you every single day of your life, including the days I was not there, which will always be the days I am most ashamed of. Finish what I started, then live your life. That is the most important instruction. Finish it and then live. Your father, Fletcher. She read it 3 times. She read it standing up, one hand on the shelf beside her to keep herself steady. She read it until the words stopped moving on the page and settled into the permanence of things that cannot be unread. Then she folded it back along its creases and placed it in the inside pocket of her hoodie next to the photograph against her chest, where she carried things she needed to keep close to her body. She looked at the bottom shelf. The fireproof box was gray, the same institutional gray as everything else in this room, latched with a combination lock. She knelt on the steel floor. She turned the first dial to 9, the second to 1, the third to 7. Her age when he left, the one child he had, the year he had given Roop the motorhome and trusted him with the waiting. The lock opened. Inside the box, on a bed of black foam shaped precisely to hold it, was a digital audio recorder. Small, black, a decade old, a consumer device that had been chosen because it was unremarkable and durable and could be operated by someone who needed to use it quickly and without fumbling. The screen was dark. A USB charging cable was coiled beside it. There was a single audio file on the device. She could see that without turning the screen on fully, just from the indicator when she held the power button. The file was dated February 4th, 2018, one day before the truck on Route 12 was found. Her thumb hovered over the play button. She pressed it. The recording began with ambient sound, the sound of a room air handling a distant door. Then two voices. The first voice, low and careful, she did not know. Then the second voice, the voice of a man speaking from the position of someone who expects to be heard and obeyed the voice of a man who has never once in his adult life been in a room where he was not the person with the most power. "Make it clean," the second voice said. "Make it look like the road." 3 seconds of silence. She pressed stop. She sat on the steel floor of the hidden room with the recorder in both hands and her father's letter against her chest and the photograph of herself at 9 years old on the wall above her and the clean white light of the LED overhead. And she understood with complete and final clarity why her father had made this room and locked the door and set the price of the motorhome at $9 and trusted a gas station owner to keep the secret for 8 years until a 17-year-old girl walked into the lot on the right night. He had known the last meeting would be his last meeting. He had gone to it anyway. He had walked into a room with Conrad Marsh, knowing what the outcome was going to be, and he had put a recorder in his pocket, and he had gotten the man to say the words, and he had pressed record, and he had given them the ending they were going to take anyway because the only thing left for him to do was make sure it mattered. She put the recorder back in the foam. She closed the box. She locked it. She sat for one more minute in the cold white light with her hands in her lap and her father's voice somewhere just out of reach, the low, calm voice from the foot of the bed on rainy nights. And she let herself feel the full weight of what she was holding before she stood up and carried it forward, because she had a feeling she would not get another moment like this one. A moment before the next thing began, a moment that was entirely hers and required nothing from her except to be in it. Then she stood up. She took the fireproof box off the shelf and carried it out of the hidden room and set it on the dinette. She went back and stood in the doorway of the room one last time, looking at the shelves, the binders, the cassettes, the laptop, all of it. Her father's life's work in the last years of his life, assembled in a space the size of a large closet waiting in the dark for someone with the combination. She would need help with the rest of it. Not because she couldn't carry it herself, but because her father had told her who to take the recorder to, and that person had a connection she did not have. And the recording was evidence. And evidence had to go through the right channel to do what evidence needed to do. And that was not her limitation. That was strategy. And strategy was something her father had apparently been very good at. There was a second, smaller envelope on the third shelf. No name on it. She opened it. A shorter letter, dated 2 weeks before the long one. "Evelyn, if you are here, you have found the recorder. Before you take it to Wit, I want you to know one more thing. Your mother does not know about any of this. About Iron Vale, about Marsh, about where I went, or why. I did not tell her because the less she knew, the safer she was, and her safety was the only thing that mattered to me more than coming home to you. She believes I died on Route 12. I let her believe it. I am sorry for what that has done to her. I am sorry for what it will do to you when you understand it. She did not stop loving me. I did not stop loving her. What I did because I could not think of another way to give you both a future. Take care of her, Evelyn. If she is still alive when you read this, she is going to need someone who understands what happened. That is you. It has always been you. Fletcher. She put the second letter in the same pocket as the first. Then she picked up the fireproof box and she put it in her backpack, and she zipped the backpack, and she picked up the crowbar from where she had set it against the wall, and she walked out of the motorhome and across the lot in the cold October afternoon light to where Rupert Calloway sat in his folding chair watching the road. She stopped in front of him. She put her hand on his shoulder. He did not look at her. He kept watching the road, but his hand came up and covered hers and stayed there warm and rough and steady, the hand of a man who has been holding something in trust for a very long time and has just understood that the holding is over. He told me to take care of you, she said. Roop's hand tightened slightly over hers and then released it. He settled back in his chair. The lights of the station flickered once in a gust of wind and then steadied. You take care of yourself first, Miss Harlow, he said, and then you go do what needs doing. She left him there in his chair watching the road and walked back to the motorhome and sat at the dinette in the falling afternoon light with the fireproof box in front of her and the notebook full of her father's addresses open to the page where one phone number was underlined in red, a field office number in Seattle, and she looked at it for a long time. And she thought about the recording in the box, and Conrad Marsh's voice, and the man who had said 4 words that had ended her father's life without even raising his volume. She was not going to call that number yet. She was going to take the recorder to Whit tomorrow morning early, before the town was fully awake. Whit had the connection. Whit would know how to move the information through the right channel with the kind of insulation that kept it from being intercepted or dismissed or quietly closed before it had the chance to become what her father had built it to become. But first, she needed to make one additional move that was hers alone. She thought about Conrad Marsh. She thought about a man who ran a company in a glass building 20 minutes from where she was sitting. A man who had once been her father's friend, who had once stood in a photograph with his arm around her father's shoulders, in front of a building still under construction, both of them young and laughing at something outside the frame. A man who had decided at some point between that photograph and February 2018 that her father's life was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be reckoned with. She thought about the $2 million her father's death had been worth to that company over the years since. She thought about $9. She thought about the difference. Then she put the phone face down on the table and lay down on the bench seat and pulled the cedar blanket up to her chin and looked at the ceiling of the motorhome in the last light of the afternoon, listening to the sounds of the gas station outside the distant road, the occasional car, the creak of the metal around her settling into the cool of the evening. Tomorrow she would take the recorder to Whit. Whit would make the call. And then Conrad Marsh was going to learn what her father had known when he walked into that last meeting with the recorder in his pocket. That there are some things you cannot buy back and some debts you cannot negotiate, and some 17-year-old girls who will walk through a door you locked 8 years ago and find exactly what you hoped they would never find, because their father knew them well enough to know they would come looking and love them enough to make sure that when they did, what they found would be enough to finish it. She was up before dawn. The darkness inside the motorhome was complete in the particular way of spaces that have no ambient light from outside, no street lamps close enough to press through the windows, no passing cars. She lay still for a moment with her eyes open and let the darkness tell her where she was. The cedar blanket, the plaid upholstery under her shoulder, the fireproof box and the backpack on the floor beside the dinette, where she had put it before she slept, so that it would be the first thing she felt if her foot hit the floor in the night. She sat up. She dressed in the dark, the gray thermal under the hoodie, the jeans with the tear at the left knee, the still damp canvas sneakers she had stuffed with paper towels the night before, in a partial attempt at drying that had been more gesture than solution. She braided her hair back. She put the photograph in the inside pocket of her hoodie against her chest, which was where it lived now. Then she did the thing she had decided to do before she fell asleep. She took the fireproof box out of her backpack and opened it and removed the digital recorder. She turned it on. The single file was still there, labeled with its date, patient, and still in the pale blue light of the small screen. She took the memory card from her own phone, the cheap auxiliary card she used for music files, and she inserted it into the recorder's expansion slot and copied the audio file onto it. The copy took 40 seconds. When it was done, she removed the card and held it in her palm for a moment, a thing the size of a thumbnail, lighter than a coin, containing 4 words spoken by a man who had arranged a murder and assumed the arrangement would stay private. She put the card in the heel of her left shoe under the insole pressed flat against the rubber. Then she put the recorder back in the foam, closed the box, locked it, and returned it to her backpack. She zipped the backpack. She stood up and took stock of herself. She was 17 years old. She had the clothes on her back, a backpack, a dead father's letters, a copy of a recording that could put a man in a federal prison, and $9 worth of motorhome to come back to. It was enough. She walked to Whit Tate's cabin in the dark. The lake road was black between the trees, the gravel just barely visible where the pre-dawn sky gave enough gray to distinguish surface from shadow. She walked it by memory and by the feel of the ground under her feet, the soft compression of wet gravel, the occasional solid resistance of a root that had pushed up under the surface. She did not use the flashlight she had found in the motorhome's overhead cabinet and taken with her, because the road was empty and the dark was manageable, and there was something about walking in the dark toward the thing you had decided to do that felt correct, felt like the right temperature for the morning she was walking into. Whit's stovepipe was already smoking when she came over the rise above the cabin, a thin white thread in the black air rising straight in the absence of wind. The porch light was on. He opened the door before she reached the steps. He was fully dressed, flannel shirt, buttoned boots laced. He looked at her and then at the sky behind her and then at her backpack without saying anything about any of it. "Come in," he said, and stepped back. The cabin's main room was small and warm, a wood stove throwing orange light through its glass door, a roll-top desk against the far wall, 2 chairs by the window looking out over the lake, a pot of coffee on the kitchen counter already made. He poured 2 cups without asking and set them on the small table between the chairs and sat down. She sat across from him and put the backpack on her knees and opened it and took out the fireproof box and unlocked it and set the recorder on the table between the 2 coffee cups. He looked at it. She told him what was on it. She told him the date of the file. She told him the 3 seconds she had played and what those 3 seconds contained. She told him the voice was Conrad Marsh's, that she had heard the same voice 2 evenings ago on the steps of the Meridian building from across the street, and that there was no uncertainty in her identification. Whit sat with his hands around his coffee cup and listened to all of it without interrupting. He did not touch the recorder. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been waiting to see for 6 years and is now making sure it is real before he allows himself to believe it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and walked to the roll-top desk and unlocked it and reached inside and came out with a cell phone that was not the phone she had seen him with the day before. This one was older, a basic model, the kind that makes calls and sends texts and does nothing else. He turned it on. He scrolled through a very short contact list. He found the number and dialed it and stood by the window looking out at the dark lake. The call was answered on the second ring. "It's Whit," he said. "The thing we talked about in 2019. It happened. I have it in front of me." His voice was even, unhurried. The voice of a man who has been rehearsing this call for 6 years and has decided that the rehearsal and the actual call should sound exactly alike. He listened. "I need you here today," he said. "Drive, don't fly. 2 vehicles. I'll have someone with me." He listened again. "Sundown," he said. "Yes." He ended the call. He turned around. "Lenora Hastings," he said. "She's been with the Bureau for 22 years. She opened a preliminary investigation on Meridian in 2020 and couldn't close it because she couldn't get past the sourcing problem. She's been waiting on something like this. She will be here by this evening." What do I do until then, Evie said. You go back to town, Wit said. You leave the recorder here. I am going to make a copy of the file and put the copies in 3 separate places before Hastings arrives. You will go to the Blue Sparrow and you will wash dishes and you will eat the breakfast Blythe gives you, and you will be a 17-year-old girl with nowhere to go who is grateful for the work. You will not carry anything that cannot be explained. You will not call anyone. He looked at her steadily over the rim of his cup. If anyone approaches you today, anyone at all, a stranger, a man in a suit, a car that slows beside you, you walk into the nearest building with people in it, and you do not come out until they are gone. You come back here at 6 this evening, not 5:30. 6. Yes, sir. He put the recorder in the fireproof box and carried it to the roll-top desk and locked it inside. Miss Harlow. She was already at the door. One more thing, he said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the porch the day before, the long, evaluating look of a man taking an accurate measurement. What your father built with that recording, what he did to get it, he knew what he was walking into, and he walked into it anyway so that you would have what you needed. That kind of thing deserves to land correctly. She will make sure it lands correctly. She nodded. He would be proud of you. She put her hand on the door. He'd better be, she said. I just opened a metal door with a crowbar 17 times and read his letters in a room the size of a closet, and I have been awake for most of 2 days. Whit almost smiled. Go, he said. She went. The walk back to Millhaven took 40 minutes in the early light, the sky going from black to a flat oyster gray above the tree line, the gravel road giving way to the county road, and the county road giving way to the south end of Main Street as the town came back to itself for the morning. She walked past Calloway's without stopping. Roop was not in his chair yet. The office light was on. She kept walking. She had something to do before the Blue Sparrow. There was a payphone on the south end of Main Street, one of the last ones in Millhaven, kept operational by the county for emergency use and used in practice by almost nobody. She stopped at it. She put in the coin she had saved from her pocket, the last handful, and she dialed the main public number for Meridian Defense Technologies that she had found on the county business registry page she had loaded on her phone 2 nights ago before the battery died. It rang twice. A receptionist answered. Evie spoke clearly and evenly. She said she had materials belonging to a former Meridian employee. She said she would be at the Blue Sparrow Diner on Main Street in Millhaven until 4 in the afternoon. She said she thought someone at Meridian would want to know. She did not give her name. She capped the call at 20 seconds and hung up. She stood at the payphone for a moment. She had just told Meridian Defense Technologies exactly where to find her. That was not recklessness. That was the plan. Whit's call to Hastings had been made. The recordings were in Whit's safe and on the card in her shoe, and Hastings and her people were already in cars driving toward Millhaven. What Evie needed now was for Conrad Marsh to be in that diner when they arrived. Not in his glass building with his legal team and his prepared statements and the institutional buffer of a corporation that had survived a decade of scrutiny by being very careful about where it allowed confrontations to occur. She needed him in a corner booth in a diner on Main Street where there was nowhere to go and nobody to call, and the only thing between him and what was coming was a table and 2 coffee cups. Her father had walked into a room knowing it was his last. She was walking into a diner. The comparison was not lost on her. The Blue Sparrow was open. The bell tinkled. Dot looked up from behind the counter and did the thing she always did, the full inventory of a person's condition, conducted in under 3 seconds with no apparent effort. She took in Evie's face, the quality of it this morning, the difference between this face and the face that had walked in 2 days ago. The first face had been a girl who was exhausted and hungry and trying not to show either. This face had been somewhere and come back from it and knew things it had not known before and was carrying them differently. Dot did not say anything about any of this. She poured the coffee with 2 creamers, set a plate down, and pointed to the kitchen door. The sink's in the back, she said. Aprons on the hook. Evie washed dishes for 4 hours. She worked steadily and without haste, the way her father had taught her to do any physical task, not fast enough to be careless, and not slow enough to be indulgent, the speed of someone who intends to be doing this for a while and is pacing accordingly. The morning breakfast rush came through in two waves and subsided. Dot moved around the front of the diner with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has run the same operation for 40 years and has reduced every inefficiency to something so small it is no longer worth addressing. At 10:30, Dot came into the kitchen and refilled her own coffee and leaned against the counter. "Honey," she said, "is there something happening today that I should know about?" It was not quite a question. Evie dried her hands on the kitchen towel. She looked at Dot. "There might be a man who comes in this afternoon," she said. "If he does, I'll need to sit with him in the corner booth for a few minutes." Dot looked at her. "What kind of man?" "The kind with a company on Cresswell Industrial Parkway." The kitchen was quiet. Dot set her coffee cup down on the counter. She was quiet for a long moment, the quiet of a woman making a series of rapid internal calculations whose conclusions settled into the expression on her face without being announced. "The bat's still under the counter," Dot said. "I know," Evie said. "You'll be in the corner booth." "Yes, I'll be 4 feet away the whole time." "Yes." Dot picked up her cup. She went back out to the front. Evie put her hands back in the dishwater. She worked through the lunch service. She ate the soup Dot put in front of her at noon without breaking stride, standing at the kitchen counter between loads, and it was thick and hot and tasted of celery and pepper and the particular good faith of someone who cooks because they care about the person eating, not because they are in the business of cooking. At 3 in the afternoon, the bell above the door tinkled. Evie heard it from the kitchen. She heard it and felt the quality of the sound differently from the way she had heard the bell all day. Felt it differently in the same way you feel a change in air pressure, differently from ordinary air, a physical awareness rather than a cognitive one. She dried her hands. She set the dishcloth on the edge of the sink. She straightened and walked to the kitchen doorway and looked out into the front of the diner. He was already at the counter. Mid-40s, tall and lean, the lean of a man who runs in the early mornings before anyone else is awake. Dark hair cut close, a charcoal overcoat that cost more than most people in Millhaven spent on a month of groceries. He sat at the counter with the ease of a man who has never once in his adult life entered a room and felt out of place in it. He had ordered coffee. He was reading something on his phone. She had seen him 2 evenings ago on the steps of the Meridian building from across the street through the shadow of a closed coffee kiosk. She had seen him in the photograph in her father's hidden room, younger construction site, both men laughing. She had heard his voice on a recorder made in the last hours of her father's life. Conrad Marsh put his phone in his coat pocket. He turned his head and looked directly at Evie. "Miss Harlow," he said. She did not move for 2 seconds. Then she walked out of the kitchen and took her apron off and folded it over the back of the nearest stool and walked to the corner booth and sat down. She looked at him. He picked up his coffee cup and walked to the booth and sat across from her. Up close, the scar above his left eyebrow was exactly where it had been in the photograph. A small, pale ridge in the skin, the kind a man carries from his 20s without thinking about it. His eyes were dark and even, and carried the specific quality of intelligence that is entirely divorced from warmth, the look of a mind that processes and calculates and does not invest emotionally in the results. He looked at her the way you look at a complicated situation you have handled many times before in slightly different configurations. "I am sorry to bother you at work," he said. His voice was the voice from the recording. The same register, the same quiet authority. She felt the recognition of it in her chest like a struck bell. "You're not bothering me," she said. He almost smiled. Something at the corner of his mouth that acknowledged the tone of what she had said without responding to it directly. "I will not take much of your time, Miss Harlow. I imagine you know who I am." "I do." "Then I will skip the introduction and speak plainly because I think that is the kind of conversation you prefer." He set his cup down. "I became aware recently that you have been asking questions about your father, about his work, about the circumstances of his death." He paused. "I understand why. You are 9 years old. You have grown up without him. You have questions that no one has given you satisfactory answers to. That is a painful way to grow up, and I have genuine sympathy for it. She did not say anything. Your father was the best engineer I have ever employed, Conrad Marsh said. He was also, in the last year of his life, a man who had developed certain convictions about his work that were not grounded in the full picture of what we were doing and why. He had access to partial information and drew conclusions from it that were significantly more alarming than the actual situation warranted. He took those conclusions to a journalist. He was in the process of making public accusations that would have been damaging to many people, including, I want you to understand this to your own family. She looked at his hands on the table. Steady, relaxed the hands of a man who does not perspire when he is lying because he does not distinguish between what he is saying and what is true with enough consistency for the distinction to produce a physiological response. His death was an accident, Conrad Marsh said. I want you to hear that from me directly. It was a tragedy. He was my friend. I think about him regularly. He looked at her with the careful, calibrated expression of a man who has practiced delivering grief in a way that does not cost him anything. I am here because I have been told that some of his materials may have survived. I do not know the contents of those materials. I have no interest in their contents. My only interest is in ensuring that your father's memory is not subjected to a posthumous legal process that he himself would have found painful had he lived. He reached inside his coat. He placed a white envelope on the table between them. He did not push it toward her. He set it down and left it there. Inside this envelope, he said, is a check made out to you. The amount is $2 million. It will clear at any bank in the state today. There are no conditions attached to it. There is no paperwork to sign. I am not asking you to confirm or deny anything. I am simply, as your father's friend, helping a young woman whose father can no longer help her himself. Evie looked at the envelope. She thought about what $2 million could do. She thought about it specifically and deliberately the way you think about a thing you are deciding not to take. She thought about a house, a real one, with a kitchen that belonged to her mother, and a door that nobody had the authority to open from outside. She thought about college, about being able to study whatever she decided was worth studying without the weight of money making every decision for her. She thought about taking her mother out of every version of the life that Marcus Vane represented and into something new and clean and forward-facing. Then she thought about her father in the last room he ever sat in February of 2018, with a recorder in his pocket and a man across from him who had already decided what was going to happen next. She looked up. Why $9, Mr. Marsh? He blinked, a single precise blink. The micro-expression of a man encountering a question he had not prepared for from a direction he had not anticipated. I'm sorry. The motorhome, she said. The man who sold it to me charged $9. My father set that price 8 years ago. Not $8, not 10. 9. Because I was 9 years old when he left. Did you know that Conrad Marsh looked at her? Something in the quality of his stillness shifted almost imperceptibly, the way a very still body of water shifts when something below the surface changes position. He left me 2 letters, Evie said. He left them in the motorhome in a room behind a locked door at the back. One of the letters explains Project Iron Veil. It explains what it actually was and what you sold and to whom and for how much. The other one talks about you by name. The corner booth was quiet. She kept her voice even. He named you Mr. Marsh. In his handwriting on paper dated late 2017, he wrote that you arranged the buyers. He wrote that you approved it. She paused. He also left a recording. The quality of the air in the booth changed. Conrad Marsh's face did not change. But the thing behind his face changed the temperature behind his eyes, the specific calculation running in the part of his mind that was always running the calculation. She saw it. She watched it happen in real time. The reassessment, the rapid restructuring of what he had walked into this diner believing and what he now understood he had walked into instead. A recording, he said. His voice was the same. He had very good control of his voice. A digital audio file, she said, dated February 4th, 2018. He was very still. The day before the truck was found on Route 12, she said, He made it in the last meeting you had with him. He put a recorder in his pocket and he sat across from you the same way I'm sitting across from you right now. And he got you to say what you said, and then he went away, and you did what you did, and you put him in a truck on Route 12, and you thought it was finished. She let that land. The recording is your voice, she said. I heard 3 seconds of it. That was enough to recognize you. I expect a federal investigator will find it sufficient. Conrad Marsh sat across from her and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the diner around them continued its ordinary operations. The coffee cooling in the cups and the fluorescent light doing its patient work overhead, and Dot moving somewhere behind the counter with the clink of plates in the morning her father had died was in the room with them. Not as a metaphor, but as something actual, something that had happened and could not be undone, and had left a shape in the world that was still there, and they were both sitting inside that shape, and they both knew it. He reached across the table and touched the edge of the white envelope. Miss Harlow, he said, whatever you believe you have. He spoke carefully, each word weighted and placed. Whatever you think you are going to do with it. I am offering you a way forward. I am offering you the means to live a life that your father wanted you to have. You are 17 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. There are people involved in what you are describing who have resources and patience and institutional relationships that you are not equipped to navigate. Take this envelope, walk out of this diner, go and live your life. My father told me to live my life too, she said, but he told me what to do first. Conrad Marsh looked at her. The same thing he said to you, she continued, before you killed him. He said, finish what I started and then live. She looked at him steadily across the table. So that is what I am going to do, Mr. Marsh. In that order. The bell above the door tinkled. She had not heard a car pull up. She had not been listening for one. But she heard the bell, and she felt, rather than saw, the shift in the room, the quality of attention changing the way it changes when something happens that has the size and weight of consequence. Conrad Marsh did not turn his head immediately. He looked at her for one more second, the look of a man completing one sentence in his mind before the next one begins, and then he turned. 3 people had come through the door. Whitfield Tate was in front, his flannel shirt buttoned, his half-glasses in his breast pocket, his face arranged in the neutral, composed expression of a man who has arrived precisely on time and is not surprised by anything he sees. Behind him was a woman, early 60s, silver hair cut very short, a plain dark jacket over dark slacks, clothes that read as ordinary until you noticed the way they fit and the way the woman wearing them carried herself, the particular stillness of a body that has been trained to be ready. Behind her were 4 men, 2 in civilian clothes, 2 with the letters FBI across their chest, in the flat yellow of identification rather than spectacle. The woman came directly to the booth. She did not look at Evie. She looked at Conrad Marsh. Mr. Marsh, she said, my name is Special Agent Lenora Hastings, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have an arrest warrant for you. The charges include conspiracy to commit murder, illegal export of controlled defense technology, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. I need you to stand up and place your hands flat on the table. The diner was completely quiet. The heavy-set man at the counter had put down his fork. The young couple in the middle booth had stopped talking. Dot stood behind the counter with one hand on the coffee pot and the other on the counter below it, and her eyes on Conrad Marsh with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for something for 8 years and is watching it arrive. Conrad Marsh did not move for 3 seconds. He looked at Lenora Hastings with the careful, measuring look he had turned on everything, assessing, calculating, finding the margins. Then he looked at Evie one last time, and in that look was something she had not expected to see in him. Not defiance, not contempt, but recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has just understood with complete accuracy exactly how he came to be sitting in this booth at this moment, who built the path that led here, and how far back the building had started, and how thoroughly it had been built. He understood that a 17-year-old girl had done what her father could not finish. He understood it, and he did not say anything about it because there was nothing to say about it, and because saying something would have been an acknowledgement. And he was not yet done conducting himself with the specific discipline of a man who believes that how you lose is as much a demonstration of character as how you win. He stood up. He placed his hands flat on the table. The agents moved. They were efficient and professional, and the whole thing took less than a minute. The handcuffs and the rights read in the low, practiced monotone of someone who has said the same words hundreds of times and gives them neither more nor less emphasis than their legal content requires. They walked him to the door. At the door, Conrad Marsh stopped. The agent at his shoulder gave him 1 second. He used it to turn his head and look back into the diner. Not at Witt, not at the agents, not at the other customers watching from their seats. He looked at Evie in the corner booth. His face was composed. His eyes were the same dark, even eyes. They had always been the eyes that processed and calculated and did not invest emotionally. But something was in them now, something small and specific. The residue of a man who has spent his life being the person who arranges the outcomes and has just arrived for the first time at an outcome he did not arrange. He turned away. The agent moved him through the door. The bell tinkled. The door closed. Through the window, Evie watched the black sedan at the curb receive him and close its door and pull away. A second car followed it. A third stayed at the curb, one agent inside watching the street with the flat professional attention of someone on a shift. The diner held its quiet for a moment. Then the heavy-set man picked up his fork. The young couple resumed their conversation. The refrigerator case near the register clicked on with its low hum. Dot put the coffee pot back on the warmer. She came around the counter. She walked to the corner booth. She slid in beside Evie, not across from her, beside her, and she put her arm around Evie's shoulders with the particular certainty of someone who does not wait to be invited to do necessary things. Evie put her head down on Dot's shoulder. She cried. Not the way she had cried in Roop's service bay the previous night, which had been the grief of a daughter for a father, 8 years of it, finally finding an exit after being held. This was something different. This was the cry of a girl who had been carrying a weight she didn't know she was carrying, had been carrying it since she was 9 years old, without being aware of its shape or its size, only aware of the constant effort of carrying it. The way your arms ache from holding something for so long that the ache becomes indistinguishable from normal. And then you put it down and your arms are empty, and that emptiness is a sensation so unfamiliar that the body mistakes it for loss before the mind understands it as relief. She cried until she was done. Dot did not say anything. She held on and let her. Whit stood near the door and looked out the window at the street and gave her the privacy of not being watched. When Evie lifted her head and wiped her face on the cuff of her hoodie, Dot did not comment on any of it. She got up and went behind the counter and came back with a fresh cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie and sat back down across from her. "Eat," she said. Evie ate. The next 4 months were not a single experience, but a sequence of smaller ones accumulating in the way that consequential events accumulate when they happen to a person who is still young enough to absorb them into the ongoing construction of who she is. Federal investigators arrived at Meridian Defense Technologies 6 days after the arrest. 31 vehicles in the early morning before the day shift carrying warrants for files and servers and communications records going back to 2012. The building on Cresswell Industrial Parkway was closed within the week. A security guard Evie had never seen papered the entrance with federal seizure notices. The 2 foreign buyers were identified from the materials in her father's hidden room and from Meridian's own financial records, which proved more cooperative than the company's lawyers, and were arrested in Zurich and Singapore within the month. 3 of Meridian's senior executives accepted plea agreements. The Department of Defense issued a formal statement in early February that was written in the careful, bloodless language of institutional acknowledgement, the language of an organization admitting a failure without admitting responsibility for the failure, which was a distinction that frustrated Whit Tate considerably, and which Evie decided was not worth spending her energy on, because the outcome was what it was, regardless of the language used to describe it. Marcus Vane, In the first week of the federal investigation, 3 accountants from the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division began going through Marcus Vane's records. By the end of the second week, they had found a pattern of payments small enough individually to avoid automatic flagging, consistent enough collectively to constitute a picture. By the end of the third week, they had traced the payment source to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, whose beneficial ownership connected through 2 intermediary entities to a trust account that had been used for discretionary payments by Meridian's Office of Corporate Affairs since 2014. Marcus Vane had been paid by Meridian Defense Technologies for 11 years. He sat in an interview room at the federal field office in Portland on a Tuesday in November and answered questions for 6 hours. His lawyer was there. His answers were careful and partial and legally calibrated in the way that answers are when a person is trying to give enough to avoid the worst charge while preserving as much of the rest as possible. He took a plea. He was sentenced to 14 months at a minimum security facility in Southern Oregon. He was released the following year. He did not come back to Millhaven. Cora Harlow Vane filed for divorce the morning the federal investigators knocked on the door of the house on Delwood Street. She did not contest any aspect of the process. She did not ask for the house, did not ask for the accounts, did not ask for anything that had Marcus Vane's hands on it. She signed her name back to what it had always been before he came. Cora Harlow. She signed it with a steadiness that the notary later described to her sister as the most composed person she had ever seen signing a document in that particular office. Conrad Marsh died in a federal holding facility in Seattle on the 20th of December, 19 days after the last of his pretrial motions had been denied. The medical examiner who examined him ruled the cause of death as acute myocardial infarction, the report noting no evidence of trauma and citing his age and undisclosed pre-existing cardiac condition as contributing factors. The ruling was natural. Whit Tate told Evie about it on the porch of his cabin on a cold morning 2 days after the news. He told her directly, looking at her over the rim of his coffee cup, without softening it or surrounding it with interpretation. "I don't believe it was natural," he said. She looked at the lake. The winter had put ice on the edges of it, thin and pale, not yet thick enough to trust. Some doors, she said, close on their own. Whit looked at her. He nodded once. She drove back to Millhaven and did not think about Conrad Marsh again that day, or the day after, or in any sustained way after that, because Whit had been right about something he had said to her in a different context. Some doors were meant to close. What her father had asked her to do was done. The recording had done what her father had built it to do. The story had landed the way her father had built it to land. The rest of it, the legal process and the institutional responses, and the question of exactly how and why a man died in a federal holding facility, was a room she was not going to walk into because she had been told to finish it and then live, and living required a decision about which rooms to enter and which to leave closed. She chose to leave that one closed. She washed dishes at the Blue Sparrow 5 mornings a week. Dot paid her $12 an hour, which was more than the job warranted, and precisely what Evie needed, and neither of them discussed the discrepancy, because they had reached an understanding in the quiet, efficient way that two people reach understandings when they are both practical and neither is particularly interested in sentimentality as a transaction about how the arrangement was going to work. She stayed in the motorhome. Rupe had replaced the battery and serviced the propane system in the first week of November without being asked, and had put the charges on a piece of paper that he never gave her, which she understood to mean there were no charges. She had come out one morning to find new windshield wipers on the vehicle and had not commented on them, and Rupe had been in his service bay when she glanced over and had not looked up from the engine he was working on, and that was the nature of their arrangement. She studied for her GED at the dinette in the evenings. The one thing that had a fixed forward momentum to it, the thing that was most clearly and concretely about the living she was supposed to be doing after the finishing. Dot had found her the study materials and left them in a bag on the motorhome step without announcement, which was how Dot handled most things she had decided to do. She went to Whit's cabin once a week on Sunday mornings, and they drank coffee on the porch and talked. And the talking was not always about her father. Sometimes it was about the town and the news and the books. They had both been reading, and those Sunday mornings became something she relied on in the way you rely on things that give you a place to put the week's accumulated weight. She did not hear from her mother until March. She had not expected to not, because Cora did not love her, but because Cora was in the process of becoming someone again. And that process required time and privacy, and the particular kind of solitude that is not loneliness, but its opposite. The solitude of a person removing themselves from an arrangement that has been wrong for a long time and discovering carefully what was there before the arrangement and what remains. On a Tuesday morning in the first week of March, the bell above the Blue Sparrow's door tinkled at 20 minutes past 9. Evie was behind the counter with the coffee pot when she heard it. She looked up the way she always looked up at the door, the automatic inventory, the quick read of who had come in and what they needed. Her mother was standing in the doorway. She was thinner than she had been in October. Not worryingly thin, but the kind of thin that results from several months of living on your own terms and eating only when you are hungry rather than when a household schedule requires it. Her face had shed something, not age, not beauty, but some quality of constant management, of being always slightly braced against the next thing that had been in her face for so long. It had come to seem like a feature of it, and now it was not there. And her face without it was younger and more itself and harder to look at directly because of how clearly it showed what had been there before. She was holding a small paper bag in both hands in front of her. The diner was quiet at that hour. The breakfast rush had cleared. One old man with a newspaper at the back. No one else. Evie set the coffee pot down. She came around the counter. She walked to her mother. Cora Harlow set the paper bag on the nearest table and held out her arms. Evie was 17 years old. She was taller than her mother now enough that when she stepped into the embrace, her mother had to reach up to hold her, and Evie had to bend slightly to put her head down on her mother's shoulder. And the geometry of it was different from what she remembered from before. From all the time she had been held by this woman before the morning, the troopers came and changed the angle of everything. She was the taller one now. She was the one who had spent the winter keeping things running. She was the one who had done what needed to be done while her mother had been somewhere else, becoming herself again. But in her mother's arms, she was not any of those things. She was 9 years old, and the world was a place that still had her father in it. And she had come home from somewhere, and her mother was here, and everything was the specific, irreducible warmth of that. She was 17 and she was 9, and she was both at once the way you are, always both the current age and all the previous ones living inside it simultaneously, and the grief and the relief and the love were all the same substance, and she was not going to try to separate them. Cora held her tight. In the kitchen doorway, Dot stood with one hand pressed flat against her sternum and the other over her mouth, and she did not move until the moment had passed its peak, and then she went quietly back into the kitchen, because some things are not meant to have witnesses. The bell above the door swayed gently in the cold March air that came through when it had opened. Then it went still. In May, Rupert Calloway sat at the kitchen table of his small bungalow on the west end of Mill Haven and signed his name to a document. The document was a certificate of title for one 1989 motorhome vehicle identification number on file, transferring ownership from Rupert James Calloway to Evelyn Fletcher Harlow of Mill Haven, Oregon. The price listed on the sale line was $9, the same price it had always been. The price that had been set 8 years ago by a man who was not present at the signing, but was present nonetheless in the way that the people we have loved are always present at the consequential moment, sitting in the chair that has their shape in it, speaking in the silence between the sentences. Evie slid the title into her backpack. Then she took out the small box she had brought with her. It was wrapped in brown paper, folded neatly at the corners, in the way her father had shown her to wrap a present when she was 6, the fold that lies flat and stays without tape if you do it correctly. She set it on the table in front of Roop. He looked at it, then he looked at her. Inside, she said. He opened it. The watch had been on the third shelf of the hidden room in a manila envelope in the back corner, and she had known what it was before she opened the envelope because of the shape and weight of it, and because there was only one object her father would have left separately from everything else, not with the files and the cassettes and the evidence, but in its own envelope in a corner. His watch. A simple thing, a stainless case, a brown leather strap worn soft with years of daily use. The kind of watch a man buys for himself when he is young and intends to keep for the rest of his life. Rupe held it in his open palm. He did not wind it. He did not put it on. He just held it and looked at it for a long time. The way you look at something that has the weight of a person in it, all the ordinary days compressed into an object the size of a $50, all the Tuesdays and the dinners and the conversations and the fishing trips and the afternoon in July when a man sat in a service bay and drank a beer with his best friend and asked him to wait and told him why. "I'll wear it on Tuesdays," Roop said. His voice was steady. He liked Tuesdays. "Yes, miss." He did. She stood up. He remained at the table with the watch in his hand, not looking up, and she understood that the moment required no further gesture from her, that some completions are quiet in proportion to how long they took, and that the correct response to 8 years of waiting faithfully honored was not words, but the simple act of bearing witness to the man who had done the waiting and letting him have his moment with the thing he had waited for. She had come to him carrying her father's things. She was leaving carrying her father's title. The distance between those two objects was 8 years and a door she had opened with a crowbar, and Rupert Calloway understood that distance better than anyone alive. "He would be proud of you, Miss Harlow," Rupe said without looking up from the watch. "You keep telling me that. I'll keep telling you. Somebody has to." She shouldered her backpack and walked out of his bungalow and down the short front walk to the street. The motor home was parked in front of the house, the new tires Rupe had put on in April sitting dark and solid on the wet asphalt. She had driven it over herself that morning from the lot, the first time she had driven it anywhere. The engine running smooth on the early May morning in a way that felt when she pulled out of the lot and onto the county road. Like the beginning of something whose shape she could not yet see, but could feel approaching from the direction she was heading. She had cleaned the motorhome out in the weeks after the investigation concluded. Everything from the hidden room had gone to the federal investigators, the binders and the cassettes, and the laptop, and all of it signed over in a documented transfer, in the presence of Agent Hastings and one of the Bureau's evidence specialists, the contents inventoried and receipted and taken in a sealed vehicle to wherever such things go when they have finished the work they were built to do. The gray metal door had been removed from its hinges and set aside. The hidden compartment was now just a small, clean room with empty shelves and a motion sensor light that came on when you stepped inside, which she did sometimes in the evenings. Not for any reason she could have articulated, just to stand in the clean, empty space and feel the dimensions of it, the dimensions of what her father had built, and what it had held and what it no longer needed to hold. Her father's letters she had kept. Both letters. They lived in the inside pocket of her hoodie against her chest, where the photograph lived, the two things that could not go to the Bureau, because they were not evidence, they were something else. They were the thing that remained after all the evidence had been taken away, the part of the story that had no legal category because it was not about a crime. It was about a father and a daughter, and the distance between them, and the fact that he had spent the last months of his life making sure that distance was not permanent. On a Saturday morning at the beginning of June, she went to the Blue Sparrow before it opened and found Dot already there, flour on her hands, the coffee on the smell of something baking in the back. She told Dot she was leaving for a while. Dot looked at her from behind the counter without surprise. She nodded slowly. Then she reached under the counter and came up with a paper bag and set it on the counter between them. "For the road," she said. "There's a sandwich and some of the lemon cookies you like and a thermos of coffee. The thermos is mine, so you'd better come back." Evie picked up the bag. She reached across the counter and put her hand over Dot's hand for a moment. Dot turned her hand over and held on briefly and then let go. "Go," she said. Evie went. She drove the motorhome to the house on Birchdale Road that Cora had rented in April, a small white house with a porch and a kitchen window that let in the morning light from the east. Cora was on the porch when Evie pulled up. She had a travel bag at her feet. They loaded the bag into the motorhome. Cora climbed into the passenger seat and looked around the cab with the expression of someone encountering an object for the first time that they have heard described many times and are finding that the description was accurate. She looked at the photograph tucked into the edge of the sun visor. Her husband kneeling at the workbench in the driveway on Carmichael Street, squinting against the sun, his hand on the shoulder of their daughter who was 9 years old and wearing his jacket. Cora looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked out the windshield at the road ahead, the south end of Mill Haven running out to the county road, and the county road running east toward the mountains. "Where are we going, Evelyn?" she asked. Evie thought about it. She thought about a man who had sat in a corner booth every Tuesday morning for 9 years and left a $5 tip on a $6 check and brought the sports page back to the counter so Dot could see how the softball team did. She thought about a man who had knelt beside a workbench in the afternoon sun with his hand on his daughter's shoulder and smiled the way you smile when nowhere else needs you. She thought about a man who had walked into the last meeting of his life with a recorder in his pocket because the only thing left he could do for the people he loved was make it count. "Somewhere he would have liked," she said. Cora was quiet for a moment. The morning sun was coming in through the passenger window and catching the silver in her hair and the lines at the corners of her eyes, and she looked in that light like a woman who has been somewhere difficult and has come back from it and has not lost anything she could not afford to lose. "He would have liked anywhere with us in it," Cora said. The motorhome pulled out onto the county road. Evie kept both hands on the wheel the way her father had taught her to drive on the back roads around Millhaven, the summer she turned 9, the summer of the denim jacket and the workbench in the photograph, the summer before everything changed. He had sat in the passenger seat and told her to keep both hands on the wheel and look at where she was going. Not at the road directly in front of her, but at the road ahead, at the point in the distance where the road was going. Because the car follows your eyes, and if you look too close, you drift, and if you look at the horizon, you hold the line. She looked at the horizon. The blue ridge of the Cascades rose ahead of them in the morning light, the peaks still carrying the last of the season's snow in the high-shadowed places. The lower slopes deep green with fir and hemlock, and the road ran east through the valley between the ranges with the river somewhere below, and to the left, and the sky above it clear for the first time in weeks, the particular sharp blue of a June morning in Oregon after a long gray spring, a blue that did not apologize for itself. That was simply what it was. She drove. Her mother sat in the passenger seat with her travel bag at her feet and her face turned toward the window and the mountains going past outside it. Her father's letters were in her pocket against her chest. His watch was on Rube Calloway's wrist. His recording was in a federal evidence room in Seattle and had already done what he had built it to do. His motorhome was running smooth under her hands, the engine finding its rhythm on the open road, the way an engine does when it has been kept properly and given room to move the new tires humming against the pavement in the low, steady register of something built for distance. The road ran east. She held the line.